welcome to the City of Bellevue regular City Council meeting for March 15th, 2021. Welcome back, everybody. Clerk, could you please do a roll call?
Sure. Mayor Robinson?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Neuenhaus?
Here.
Councilmember Barksdale?
Here.
Councilmember Lee?
Here.
Councilmember Robertson?
Present.
Councilmember Stokes?
Here.
And Councilmember Zahn?
Here.
Great, thank you.
So we've had a lot of incidents of Asian hate crimes and messaging that's just not tolerable anywhere, and particularly not in Bellevue. And so we are doing a proclamation tonight to renew our commitment to our community. And I've asked Councilmember Zahn to read the proclamation for us.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'm so honored to read this proclamation, especially since we've had a number of rallies in our community to make sure that we are daylighting these incidences that are happening in our community. Whereas Bellevue is one of the most diverse cities in Washington state, with 40% of the population identifying as part of the Asian American and Pacific Islander community, a group that has contributed and continues to contribute to our country's progress, culture, and success. And whereas beginning in 2020, there has been a documented regional and nationwide trend of increased discrimination, hate, and violence against Asian American communities, from young adults to our most vulnerable elderly, exacerbated by false narratives and xenophobia around the coronavirus. And whereas these ongoing and reprehensible displays of hate have often gone unnoticed and unreported, perpetuating a model minority myth that Asians will be complacent and stay silent, even when being targeted and harmed. And whereas hate, violence, and bias are not accepted in our community, especially when targeting or scapegoating individuals based on their race or identity. And whereas the City Council remains committed to our vision of not just welcoming the world and recognizing our diversity as a key strength for the city and our character, but that we are a city where everyone has a deep sense of belonging. And whereas each of us has a personal responsibility to prevent the spread of misinformation, condemn violent acts in any form, support all fellow community members, and reject stigma, hate, and bias in all its forms. And whereas there is an urgent need for the community at large to unite and come together to support the AAPI community and report incidences of hate and bias, especially as we continue to recover together from the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic. And whereas in the coming weeks, the city will be launching enhanced efforts and opportunities to engage to combat this virulent type of racism, intolerance, and xenophobia. Now, therefore, I, on behalf of the Mayor Lynn Robinson, Mayor of the City of Bellevue, Washington, and on behalf of its City Council, to hereby proclaim our renewed and ongoing commitment to be a diverse and inclusive community free from racism, so that all who live, work, and play in Bellevue feel welcomed. Bellevue strongly stands against hate, bias, and violence based on race, nationality, gender, disability, or religion. And I urge all residents to unite together in solidarity with our Asian American and Pacific Islander neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Zahn. Councilmember Barksdale, could you please lead us in the flag salute?
Good thing, Mayor. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and
justice
for all.
Thank you. Could I get a motion to approve the agenda, please?
I move to approve the agenda.
Is there a second? Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. City Clerk, do we have oral communications for tonight?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This evening, there are 7 pre-registered speakers for oral communications. However, 5 of those speakers are here to speak in support of the MFTE program, item 10A. So only the first 3 speakers will be allowed pursuant to council rules. With that, I will call the first speaker, who is Elaine Fouché. Ms. Fouché, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Your time begins now.
Hi, my name is Elaine Fouché. I work in a local psychiatric hospital in the social services department. And I just want to say I fully support the proposal to train police officers on mental health response. And I think any person in a position of authority should have that kind of training. However, as the city goes about creating a mental health response team, they should include mental health professionals, not armed officers. In fact, there are already mental health professionals in our community you could hire to do this work who are already trained and have the correct expertise and skill set. Designated crisis responders are the only people in Washington state who can involuntarily detain someone for mental health treatment. This means they know how to assess mental health crises and determine what is needed to support that individual. Why not use our already existing resources to streamline mental health response? Additionally, most of my patients are brought to the hospital by law enforcement. I have yet to come across a case where the reason a patient is hospitalized is related to a criminal charge. Mental health courts are completely separate from criminal courts, but many patients get confused and ask me if this will go on their criminal record or be held against them. For someone experiencing a mental health crisis, when their first point of contact is the police, it implies they have done something wrong. All in all, I do think police officers need mental health training, but I think we can create a more compassionate and efficient mental health system by including mental health professionals in mental health crisis response teams. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fouché. The next speaker this evening is Christian Dorsett. And Mr. Dorsett, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Your time begins now.
Oh, thank you. Hi, my name is Christian Dorsett. I live in Bellevue. I also own a landscaping business, Dorsett Landscaping. I suffered from a traumatic brain injury, February 2020. I am now recovered, miraculously. I'm also the one councilperson Robertson called a troll on Twitter. I am not a troll, just so you know. I also just read a Seattle Times article on Sunday about a 2017 incident where it turns out one of the same cops that committed perjury, and he did, in my case, has kept attacking people along with other cops. This time it was a mother and father protecting their son. A year later, Officer Dowsing choked a female driver out. And that's not the start or the end of this problem, is it? I told all officials in the city of Bellevue in 2015 the police would keep violating their oath and that I wanted the behavior to stop. Instead, Chief Milet has kept a QAnon cop on the payroll, while the chief himself wants to move to Colorado near the Denver area, not to retire, but because he doesn't like it here. I might be a little late to the party, but I think it is beyond clear in 2021, the current US criminal legal system needs to be abolished, not reformed. This professionalism, of where you will sit and let me speak is simply to provide cover for a dehumanizing process. You don't change, you don't care, you deal in real estate. You're not even in charge of anything. The city manager won't hold the bad actors responsible. And for that, I would like Brad Miyake to be replaced with someone who lives in a Bellevue zip code at least. The police department clearly must be completely reformed before another person gets hurt or killed. Chief, please don't come and try and arrest me for talking or try to beat my parents up, okay? Thanks, bud. Thank you guys and good night.
Thank you. The next speaker is Pearl Leung. Ms. Leung, can you hear me?
There we go. I think I'm unmuted now.
Perfect. Thank you. Your time begins now.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Robinson and members of the City Council. I'm Pearl Lang with Amazon, and tonight I'd like to comment on the multifamily tax exemption program update. Amazon is committed to working with the City Council and the City of Bellevue to plan for growth that we know will be coming to downtown, and we so appreciate your partnership and collaboration. Listening to the Council's thoughtful questions and comments during your study session last week on the affordable housing strategy implementation, we heard excellent points made about the need for setting data-informed housing goals based on the current and projected need for housing. And this is where we believe there's an opportunity to make the city's MFTE program one of the most productive and efficient tools to generate affordable workforce housing. When calibrated correctly to meet the right goals, MFTE can be that win-win unicorn holy grail of tools that leverages modest tax incentives not paid by the City of Bellevue to harness private investments for the public good. We have an opportunity to go big and enable the program to meet more aggressive housing goals this year. So how do we know the program is calibrated to maximize results and what changes should be considered to improve the program? I'd like to quickly offer a few points for your discussion. First, we believe the program's success should be tied to participation rates and the number of units generated. The participation rate can tell us the percentage of developments that opt into this incentive program versus keeping their building at 100% market rate. And if the incentives are not being used or only used in downtown, then we should really look at calibrating the program to increase participation and therefore increase the number of affordable housing units generated. Second, we have heard consistently from market rate developers that the primary barrier to the program participation is that all MFTE units must provide free parking. And the best way to ensure that MFTE yields more units is to remove this requirement. And removing it doesn't mean that there won't be any parking. It simply allows for more flexibility for the program, for the project to pencil. My third and last point is around income levels. The MFTE program is a tool originally designed to increase workforce housing to meet the housing demands of our teachers, frontline workers, and anyone who makes 80% of area median income. And to that, we support the staff 1A and 1B approaches. And while we agree that our region needs more low-income housing, applying the MFTE as a tool to meet that need would be using the wrong tool for the problem. So I'd like to wrap up by expressing my sincere gratitude to the council and the city for your work on this important issue. We know that the MFTE program, what it can do, and we're excited for it to have this opportunity to work with you to make this program successful in producing thousands of workforce housing units in Bellevue for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The next speaker this evening is Chris Johnson. Mr. Johnson, can you hear me?
I certainly can. Thank you.
Perfect. Your time begins now.
Right. Mayor Robinson and council members, for the record, Chris Johnson with the Bellevue Chamber of Commerce. We're located at 330 112th Avenue Northeast, Suite 100, Bellevue 98004. Thanks to both council and staff for including the business community in the city's MFT update stakeholder outreach process. You know, the chamber has had a number of consultations with staff on both programmatic and technical matters, all with one goal in mind: to maximize the number of affordable workforce units which will be produced. With 30,000 new jobs on the way to Bellevue, we simply cannot settle for anything less. I think tonight you're going to hear from a number of speakers on this topic, so I'm just going to offer a few high-level points. First, no matter how well conceived, an incentive program is not fulfilling its purpose if it is underutilized. That's why we recommend establishing a threshold of 80% AMI for all land use districts where MFTE is authorized. This is the single most important step that can be taken to ensure MFTE is actually used. Second, we are strongly in favor of stacking or layering the use of tools such as MFTE and the amenity incentive system. However, in order for MFTE to be successful, it cannot be dependent on an overlap with incentive zoning. Keep it simple, allow maximum flexibility in code, and do not require a lower AMI threshold where stacking is permitted. And third, as you've already heard tonight, under no circumstances should parking be required as an element of affordable rent in urban land use districts. Structured parking is expensive and can cost or add tens of thousands of dollars to the cost of a unit. We know that some income-constrained households may currently require a vehicle and a parking stall, but this will change as more affordable housing is constructed within walking distance of frequent transit service. Thanks for listening, and we will remain engaged with you on how to best maximize the creation of affordable and workforce housing in Bellevue.
Thank you for your comments. The next speaker this evening is Abigail Dewees. Abigail Dewees, can you hear me?
I sure can. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Thank you. Your time begins now.
Good evening, council members, and thank you for the opportunity to comment this evening on the changes to the city's MFTE program. I'm Abigail Dewees. I'm a land use attorney at the Hillis Clark firm, and tonight I'm speaking as the chair of NIAP's East Side Task Force. NIAP is Washington State's Commercial Real Estate Development Association, and we have about 1,000 members statewide, the majority of which are here in the Puget Sound region. An MFTE program that works well can generate hundreds of middle-income housing units. Right now, Bellevue's program is generating only a few dozen a year. This is far too few, especially in light of the existing unmet need in the city, which is estimated by Microsoft and Zillow to be nearly 13,000 units at 60% to 120% AMI. This is also too few in light of the significant job growth anticipated by employers like Amazon within the city. The city's set goal of 65 units per year through the program is far too low to meet these needs. We've been actively engaged with the city and the Bellevue Chamber's Plush Committee for nearly a year on what issues might be with the current program and how it could be changed to resolve them. Our work has been tested with market rate developers who are building now or in the near future in Bellevue to make sure it will work for various pro formas and sites. We've appreciated the city staff who've engaged directly with our small work group and is listening to our feedback and continuing to collaborate. But we wanted to share some of our specific feedback with the program directly. First, we believe MFTE works best if it's a middle income housing tool. Our recommendation is that the AMI is recalibrated and simplified to be at 80% AMI on a citywide basis instead of the current 50 to 70% AMI that varies based on project location. We thank staff for reflecting this approach in the 1A and 1B recommended approaches, and we support those. Consistency across the city's urban areas is very important, and we do not support approach number 2 that would lower AMIs to 50% if combined with land use incentives. This has not yet been studied to verify it will work. Second, and as mentioned by the 2 prior speakers, the uncodified but staff-imposed requirement that every MFTE resident must have a free parking stall is one of the biggest barriers to participation in the program. We've heard from our members that this is very, very hard to accommodate, as structured parking can cost $50,000 to $70,000 per stall and can in some cases require another below grade level. Thank you for listening to our comments tonight.
Thank you for your comments. The final 2 speakers are both signed up for support with regard to the MFTE program, so we will not be able to hear from those speakers as we've reached the 3 speaker maximum. At this point, I would ask if there is anyone else connected to this meeting who would like to make comment to the City Council. If so, please use the raise hand function in Zoom or *9 if you're connected with a phone. Again, the topic must not be support of the MFTE item 10A. And Mayor, I do not see any additional hands raised. That would close oral communications.
Okay, great, thank you. Next, we're on to the report of the city manager, Mr. Miyake.
Good evening, Mayor Robinson and council members. I have one item to report under the city manager's report, and that is an update to the community crisis team effort, which has been initiated by our Bellevue Police Department as a result of recent community feedback, as well as internal feedback within the police department itself. Just by way of background, this effort is focused on responding to emergency calls involving people in crisis who are suffering from mental issues. Before we provide you this update, I wanted to give Chief Millett an opportunity to introduce his newest member of the Bellevue Police Department's executive leadership team. So Steve, would you like to do that?
I would. Thank you, Mr. Miyake. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Sometime over the summer, Chief Kleinig decided to retire, and we started the process of filling his position. We did a national search, and during panel interviews and other evaluative processes, one person rose to the top of the list clearly, and that is our new Assistant Chief, Wendell Shirley. Wendell comes up from California. He served in the Santa Monica Police Department for, I think, close to 26 years, retiring as a captain, but also serving, I believe, as a deputy commander or deputy assistant chief. Wendell brings years of experience, and I have no doubt that he's going to be very, very effective in Bellevue. So, Wendell, would you say a few words?
Thank you, Chief. First of all, I'd like to thank the Chief for this opportunity for selecting me. I'm humbled at this exciting opportunity to work in this great city of Bellevue. I also look forward to working with the city's leadership team. I've met several of you. I've met several city council members, the city manager, and the welcoming could not have been better. So I thank you. I also want to say something to the Bellevue community. I look forward to meeting you, listening to you, and working side by side with you to make Bellevue an even better city to live, to work, and visit. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I look forward to rolling up my sleeves and getting to work.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Chief Shirley. So with that, I'm going to turn this presentation over to Chief Milet as well as Chief Hagan.
Well, Council, tonight staff will be providing a very brief update on the police department's Community Crisis Assistance Team. As already mentioned, the purpose of the program is to better serve those in our community suffering from mental health crisis and substance abuse issues. Joining us tonight is our Fire Chief, Jay Hagan. The development of the program continues to be a work in progress. During this development phase, staff has evaluated similar programs from across the country and have adopted certain aspects from these programs into the CCAT program. Chief Hagan and I have had numerous conversations about integrating the CCAT program with our Fire Cares program. We're still examining the possibility. While we've made some progress, there's still much work to be done. Folks, we want to get this right, so we're not rushing through the program development process. However, we are very much aware that we need to get something up and running so we can start more effectively serving this part of our community. I'm hopeful that we will have a pilot project program ready to be launched sometime in Q2. At that time, staff will provide another update to the council. This is going to be a really brief. So I want to thank you for your continued support of the men and women of both the police department and the fire department as we all continue to serve the public. And Mr. Miyake, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Chief Milet. So more to come in the future, another update for sure in Q2. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Miyake. And we've gotten lots of feedback on the concept of this program, and we'll have council available to provide input as it formulates. So let's move on to the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve?
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Is there a second? Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great. Okay, so we have 3 study session items tonight. The first one I expect we're going to spend the most amount of time on. And though I know there's going to be a lot of comments and questions, we have a nice presentation first, but I'd like to ask that everybody limit their comments and questions to 3 minutes at a time, and we'll be able to go around numerous times. I'll be sure that everybody has an opportunity to weigh in. So Mr. Miyake, would you like to introduce this, please?
Sure, Mayor. Thank you, council members. As you mentioned, our first study session topic is on the multifamily tax exemption program. This is an update. And just by way of background, this update was launched in late last year in October of 2020. Tonight is the first of up to 2 planned council study sessions on the MFT update. Staff, we'll be planning to return back sometime in April with a program update recommendation in response to direction and feedback received from council. So again, this evening staff is seeking feedback and a possible policy direction in the various areas that were outlined in your agenda packet this evening. And joining us this evening is Matt Cummins, Director, Emil King, Assistant Director, and Elizabeth de Regret, Senior Planner of the Community Development Department. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Mac to start the presentation. Mac.
All right, thank you, City Manager Miyake. Mayor and Council, it's good to be back with you here this evening talking about the multifamily tax exemption program. I thought as we get into this, we might want to put this in context for the public and some other folks on TV. This is one of many programs the city is currently looking at relative to what we can do as a local municipal government in furthering the advancement of affordable housing policy in the city of Bellevue. And specifically, when we look at this tool as a financial incentive by way of exempting certain property taxes to those developers that are willing to provide affordable housing, there's a whole lot of topical areas that are going to come up and you're going to hear about tonight. Some of the speakers mentioned this, but I will mention it. As we thought about this and brought this idea back to you, the idea of better utilization for the MFTE program was a core principle that everybody was thinking about. And as we started to think about that, there are a whole bunch of different topical areas that come up. So for example, is better utilization mean more unit production? Does it mean serving different populations, lower AMIs, higher AMIs? How does this tool work with other programs that the city has, for example? And we have studied quite a bit and heard from a number of folks about what this program can or should be vis-a-vis thinking about workforce housing and the missing middle, and how does all that work together? And we're going to walk through all those conclusions with you. But by way of history, I think it's also worth noting that when this program first started, we didn't have all the same tools that we have now, and we didn't have revenue streams like 1590 to look at very deep affordability. And this program was originally set up to try to be a deeper affordability program. So we are going to be recommending that this program in very high level terms becomes more of a workforce program, particularly as a standalone program. And then I think maybe the most difficult part of the conversation is to explain how this program at City of Bellevue layers in with what we also try to do, which is the land use coding incentive program, that offers financial incentives to developers. And I mention that because many cities don't do that. They don't allow the layering. So effectively what we do is we allow for the potential for a double bonus on the same units getting produced. And so what are the financial metrics around that is a values discussion you're all going to be taking up tonight. And then lastly, of course, you'll all be talking about the affordability index and what the various components of that can or should be. And we'll get into all of that. Of course, very different than total parking that's required. This is just a cost question and access relative to utilization and or need. So I'm going to hand it off to Elizabeth Direct, our senior planner. And of course, I'll be able to comment at the end along with Emil King, our assistant director, about all these different policy and values comments. And we'll be breaking the presentation up into chunks for you to take action on questions around citywide versus not, the different affordability things I just mentioned, the parking question and so forth. So I'll hand it off to Elizabeth. Thanks.
Thanks, Mac. And good evening, Mayor Robinson and members of council. As Mac just said, there's a lot that we'll be covering today, so we'll be breaking this up a little bit, but we're going to start out with some background information and just laying the stage, and then we'll just kind of take this one bite at a time. So this tells you a little bit about what we'll be looking through today. As City Manager Miyake mentioned, we are hoping to get direction on a number of these issues that we are planning to return with another study session. So we will be able to dive into some of the details at that study session, but are hoping to get some pretty good direction on some of these items today. And you'll see through the agenda, we'll start with some background material, just reminding everybody what the program does, how it works today, and then some analysis we've done, some outreach we've done, looking at the existing program and what needs to update, which really led to these different policy discussions. So we'll start with looking at geographic expansion, our family-sized unit requirement and a potential alternative that we've come up with, and then really diving into the affordability levels, where that need is, how the program could be adjusted, and then also looking at layering the different programs, and then wrapping up with a quick touch on potentially looking at an opportunity for life of project affordability or extending the affordability timeline of the projects, and then ending with that parking question. So just to remind everybody of how the MFTE program works, this is all based off of state legislation. So there's certain things we have to follow. We have to designate residential target areas, which are basically these gray areas in the city on the map here, where the MFTE program is permitted, but we have quite a bit of flexibility in where those can be. We have to require that at least 20% of the units be affordable in order to utilize the 12-year tax exemption. The tax exemption only exempts the residential improvements on the property, not the property itself. And today, there's a lot of flexibility around the AMI levels that the state legislation permits. So in Bellevue, it ranges from 50 to 70% AMI, depending on location. And a lot of that depends on this conversation about layering and what other incentives are available in these different areas. And just as a reminder, the AMI is the area median income. And this is really based off of looking at tenants' incomes and what the average is for the county, and looking at making sure that these tenants are not spending more than 30% of that income on rent. So that is how these rents are calculated. And that's based off of decades of kind of how this has been done in general. And we'll be touching on that a little bit later as well. We also have a requirement that very small units have deeper affordability requirements, and that 15% of units in any MFTE project, not just the MFTE units, but all of the units have to be 2 bedrooms or larger in order to accommodate families. And as Mac mentioned, we allow an overlap with incentive programs, which we'll get into a little bit later, but those incentive programs target 80% AMI. So just a quick review of the schedule here. We got approval to launch back in October, and so we dove pretty immediately into outreach efforts, worked with a lot of different groups. We'll go over that in a moment. And using that feedback, staff has developed a number of scenarios and analyzed those scenarios to understand what the financial impacts, what the utilization impacts would be of those different scenarios. And then we're coming back today showing you what those scenarios look like with some recommendations on these different policy issues. And we're hoping to get some direction on all 6 of these policy issues today, and then we'll return in about a month to work out some details, look at some draft language, and then also potentially incorporate a couple additions that might be coming with some state legislation that is currently in the works. So there might be some flexibility that we get if some legislation passes, and we would be able to come back in April with that information. And then we are required by state law to have a public hearing, but this is also an opportunity for us to really get community feedback. The public hearing is only required to talk about any change to the geographic target areas, but we are hoping to actually ask for feedback on the program update as a whole at that point, and then following that up with code adoption, hopefully in the summer. So what we did when we first launched was really look at our current program to understand what's happening today, understand what's working, what's not working, what needs changing. But also as part of that, we reached out to individual developers who have worked in Bellevue in the past 5 years since MFTE was first adopted, and also those who are currently working on projects and will be bringing projects through the process in the next few years to understand their thought process, how MFTE is working for them, but also how it's changed over time. So, you know, when we launched in October, we were looking at about a 15 to 20% utilization rate, depending on kind of how you look at it, since we did update the program in 2018. But what we've actually found is even since October, we've had 2 more projects totaling around 100 affordable units be approved for this program. And so we're already seeing increased utilization under current regulations. We still think there's a lot of things we should update, and you'll hear about all of those today. But it's we've actually been seeing quite a bit of increased utilization and expect closer to 40 to 50% of projects, even under the current program, to be able to use MFTE and really follow through on that. It's just as people start becoming more familiar with the program and as staff has really increased outreach efforts as well, we're seeing that utilization increase on its own. So I already kind of mentioned this first row here, where we've talked kind of one-on-one with a lot of different developers, heard about individual project constraints and whatever feedback they had for us. We've also been working very closely with the Bellevue Chamber. You heard comments at the beginning of the session today from that group, and we've been working really collaboratively, having monthly meetings with them, and that will continue after this session as well. And getting really down into the weeds on all of the finances. This is really, as far as developers are concerned, it's the financial balance. We need to make sure that our model really reflects all of the decisions and all of the pro formas and everything that they have to think about. And then we've also worked quite a bit with the BDA as well. Those conversations have been a little bit more high level and policy focused, thinking about that family size unit requirement, thinking about what the affordabilities need to be in order to target where that need is for some of our downtown employees, things like that. And so I'm just going to touch really lightly on this. Staff did develop a very detailed financial model in collaboration with the Bellevue Chamber. And so this committee is the Permitting, Land Use, Sustainability, and Housing Committee. That's the group that we've been working quite a bit with. And basically, we're able to put in different inputs that would reflect different project situations, different locations in the city, and different potential variables for updates to the program, different AMI level requirements, different percentages, different unit mixes, et cetera, and understand what that would do. And so the way we analyze this, and you'll see this in a little bit when we start looking at some of the scenarios, is develop a feasibility index. And this was fairly complicated math and doing a lot of different things, but the high level way of looking at this is that the feasibility index is basically the return that a developer gets when they're using the MFTE program. So they basically balance, on one hand, there's a tax exemption, that's good for them. On the other hand, there are costs that they have to pay because they are lowering market rents down to affordable rents, and that rent gap costs them money. And so they balance these two, and they want the exemption to be bigger than the rent gap, or they're obviously not going to use the program. And so this feasibility index represents what that balance is and what that return is. So if that's 20, it means that they get about a 20% return. That's good because we want to make sure that there's a buffer there, because there are a number of risks, which are outlined in some of the packet materials around guessing what this tax exemption is going to be and exactly how those affordable rents will change over time, things like that. So this is just a high level way of looking. Basically, when you see a feasibility index, it should be targeted somewhere between 20 and 40 in order to really think that we're going to get very good utilization of this program. And so now we're going to dive into the policy questions, and we'll be taking one of these at a time. So I'm just going to present the geographic expansion, and then we'll pause and do a go round for comments and questions. So this one is something that was specifically mentioned when we launched. Currently, these blue areas are the existing residential target areas, or RTAs, where the program can be used. And each of them has slightly different requirements under a current program. And we were asked to take a look at expanding this to all of the multifamily zones citywide. So you'll see all these red areas are multifamily zoning, and the kind of pinker areas are office zoning that do allow multifamily, but it's somewhat limited. And then this hashed area with the diagonal lines is really trying to tie this to transit access and understanding who has good access to frequent transit. And so all those shaded areas are within a half mile of a frequent transit station. And so you'll see a lot of our multifamily zoning in the city has pretty good transit access. And that was something that we were asked to look at. And so staff kind of took this and said, let's look at expanding the program to all of these multifamily zones so that we aren't excluding any potential projects that might come up in the coming years in any of these areas. So this isn't changing any existing zoning. This isn't going to make any different types of buildings get built than would otherwise be built. It's really just allowing buildings that would be built anyway to use MFTE and incorporate affordable housing as a percentage of those units. So staff is asking for direction on this today to look at how we should be changing our residential target areas. And I'm going to stop there.
Okay, thank you. I need to change my view so I can see everybody. Excuse me just a sec. There we go. Okay, I'm going to go in this order, starting with council members on, then Robertson, Barksdale, Lee, Stokes, Deputy Mayor, and then myself. So council members on.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just want to clarify. So right now we're only addressing this particular question about expanding it citywide. Is that right? Just want to make sure. Yes. Yes.
That is correct.
Okay. Okay, great.
It's not citywide, it's wherever multifamily is allowed.
Where multifamily is allowed within the city. Sorry, let me clarify that. Yes. So I would say that I support this approach because when I think about our retreat and our vision where we talk about housing choices abound and that there's affordable housing citywide, that as we look at the map of the areas and the overlap, it makes sense to me that we make this approach available so that we actually have the ability to have housing affordability at many different levels in many areas throughout the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Robertson.
Thanks. Yeah, to this question, absolutely. I support expanding it to all multifamily zones in the cities. I think I've been advocating for that for about 3 years. That's all I'm going to say. So just let's do it.
Thank you. Councilmember Barksdale.
I support it. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. Councilmember Stokes. Oh my, okay, you can't get less than this. Deputy Mayor.
I support it, Mayor.
Thank you, and I do as well. So that was easy. Thank you very much. Go ahead to our next one, staff.
All right, hopefully they're all that easy. I don't think they will be, but you can always hope. So this next issue is about our family-sized unit requirement. And our current requirement, as I mentioned, is that 15% of the units be 2 bedrooms or larger. And in our outreach efforts, we found that this roughly matches the market today. So most projects that are multifamily projects going in Bellevue have about 15% or more units are 2 bedrooms. And so we didn't get really pushback on lowering that number or changing it much. So we recommend retaining that requirement. But we also found that there are a couple projects out there that are kind of a different typology. They aren't typical projects with a mix of studios, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. They're really focused on studios and maybe some 1 bedrooms. Not necessarily micro units, since we already have a requirement that those are deeper affordability, but really something in the middle there. And for these projects, they wouldn't consider using MFTE right now because they're nowhere near the required minimum number of 2 bedrooms. And so we want to make sure that projects like that are still able to provide affordability, but because they have slightly smaller unit types, we might actually be able to push it so that they get either more quantity of units at the same affordability levels, or that those units could be deeper affordability. And so staff is recommending adding an alternate pathway for projects like that, which really focus on studios and 1 bedrooms, to still be able to utilize the program, but with slightly different affordability requirements. And so today we are just asking for direction on whether this is a type of change that council is interested in. We don't need to work out the specifics of exactly what those requirements are. We can come back in April with that, but we're hoping for direction on whether an alternate program should be developed for those types of projects. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. So this would be across, sorry, I'm going to count on me, I'm going to call on me first, and then we'll do the Deputy Mayor, Councilmember Stokes, Lee, Barksdale, and Robertson, and Zahn. So this would be across the board for all the areas. It would be the same, whether it's downtown or Crossroads, et cetera, right? I'm wondering if that is realistic for downtown development. You say that currently developers tend to put in the 2-bedroom anyway. Is that true of downtown as well?
Yeah, we've looked at projects that have been coming in recently downtown, and they're coming right at around 15 to 20%. And we've also, in working with the Plush Committee, asked them about this, and they said they don't really have a problem with that. You know, in a couple instances, they might need to add 1 2-bedroom unit or so, but there really wasn't too much conversation about that issue.
Well, I would say that the original intention when coming up with this requirement was to create housing for families. And so I think that it has been successful in doing that, and I would like to continue to provide that as well. And I know there's going to be other opportunities to emphasize smaller units development later on tonight, so I'm comfortable with this myself. Deputy Mayor Nunes.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm fairly comfortable with this as well, retaining that existing requirement, and then also adding an alternate pathway of either more units. What concerns me a little bit, the deeper affordability, so that would be the AMI requirement being lowered, where I think we've heard from quite a few stakeholders tonight and and that actually leads me a question about a national standard that 80% is that kind of sweet spot that we've heard from a lot of these stakeholders. So actually, can you confirm that for me, Elizabeth? Is that almost like a national standard, or I don't, you have to explain to me if it is a national standard or what we see best in this region or for our city, but can you expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we will definitely get into this in the very next topic in more detail, but you know, the MFTE programs vary across the state a lot, and most of them have requirements lower than 80% AMI, but they do vary quite a bit, and it really depends on how you layer with other things and what the other details of programs are.
Okay, thank you very much. So then
right now we're looking at direction about amending the existing
units
requirement, the 15% of any MFTE projects units be 2 bedrooms or larger. Do you want to retain that, or do you want to add to it or amend it? So that's what we're looking at right this minute. And you're saying what, Deputy Mayor?
I'm saying that I am in favor of the staff recommendation to retain the existing requirement, but I'm also willing to look at it to have staff look at an alternate pathway as well for either more units or more affordable units.
Okay. Okay. Councilmember Stokes.
I was going to say the same, but I'm not quite sure that the extent of what the deputy mayor is saying on the thing he wants to get into. So I'll just say I agree with this proposal as stated.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lee.
I agree to the 15% unit at 2 bedroom or larger. The reason is that the market seems to say that's the case. When we talk to the developers, and they agree. And I think this is where I really appreciate the Amazon's speaker saying that we need to look at data, look at needs. And unless there's something else tells me that 15% is not the right number, which I don't know. I think that's what we have to depend on the staff to tell us if we can understand, and working with the developers, looking at the marketplace. Lack of any of that, this seems to be the number that's working. So I will stick with this. However, because of what I said, I haven't heard from the staff saying that this is the right number. So if we can, the staff can prove that this is not the right number, there's a better number to use based on data, based on needs, then I would be happy to look at alternate pathway. But I would look at alternate pathway of maybe more or less units based on data, based on needs. But at this moment, lacking of all those, I would live with 15% of units at 2 bedroom or larger.
So you support staff's recommendation?
That's what I said.
Thank you. Councilmember Barksdale.
I support staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Councilmember Robertson.
Thanks. So I'm a little confused as to the direction we're giving tonight. So as I understand it, I just want to make sure I understand. Staff is recommending that we keep the 15% of the MFTE units being 2 bedrooms or larger, but they're asking that we also consider having a different alternative for buildings that have no 2 bedrooms, right? So you're not asking in this alternative that we allow people who are building a mixed building with 2 bedrooms, 1 bedrooms, and studios to have no 2 bedrooms as the MFTE. It's just if people are building a building with only 1 bedrooms or studios, or a mix of only 1 bedrooms and studios, that they be allowed to still have an ability to use MFTE, and that we either compensate for that by having deeper affordability or a higher percentage. Is that correct?
Yes, Councilmember Robertson, that's exactly right. We think we're missing an opportunity to get people into the MFTE program because their buildings just are never intended to be a traditional apartment building.
Okay, I was hearing my colleagues talk about this and I wasn't getting that that's what we were weighing in on. So I do support that. I think that if there are no 2 bedrooms and a building is 1 bedroom or a studio or both, that we should still allow those developments, because we want affordability and we want more workforce housing, to still use MFTE, whether it's a deeper affordability or a higher percentage of units being the 80% or whatever number we land on. I would really like to leave that up to the developer. So if we're doing this in the code, it would say, that they can shoot, if the number is 25%, they can either do 25% or they can keep it at 20% and have it be at, 60% or 70%. I'd like to leave it optional for the developer, because we're going to get more units if we make it flexible for them to be able to utilize this. So I do support keeping the 15% for buildings that have mixed numbers of bedrooms, and allowing MFTE use for the buildings with the fewer bedroom units. Thanks.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Is intended.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Personally, I wasn't sure if we were covering that one right now or if we were going to get to that. So
yeah, that's why I was a little confused. I'm like, people are saying support the staff. What is that? What does that mean?
Yeah, I gotcha. So if Deputy Mayor, Councilmember Stokes, Lee, or Barksdale want to change anything, I'm in agreement with Councilmember Robertson's assessment of this personally. So so Councilmember Zahn, would you like to make a comment?
Yes, I support staff's recommendation to retain the 15% for those buildings that have 2 bedrooms, and also to create that alternative pathway. I did have one question. And that is that when we have these units, are they designed for ADA? So I'm thinking about our seniors and the ability to move out of their home and have the ability to perhaps move into a slightly smaller unit that has all the ADA features, so that, grab bars and not falling and various things. So does our code, or does the design allow for that? Because I'm thinking that, these the units that may be studios or 1 bedrooms may very well be housing that our seniors would very much be interested in. So I just wanted to understand that. Is that a separate discussion or part of this?
I think it's part of this.
So could staff help me on this question about the units and how it might need to be designed in a way that really supports seniors aging in that unit?
I think the question is, could you make the requirement to make all those units ADA without ruining the calculation for the developer? I don't know what the cost differential is.
Thank you, Mayor. You're much better at this part. I know that we want to support seniors, didn't have the right words.
Mac, is this something you have an answer for, or do we need to come back?
No, I'm very comfortable. I think as you're all throwing out some potential options and policy considerations, we're going to, just so you know, we're going to bring you back a range of options and the pros and cons of all of them. So what we needed was some direction on, are you interested in a pathway for these, some different types of buildings? And so, yeah, we'll bring that back to you. We're good tonight.
Okay, then I support this. Thank you.
Great. Okay. That's everybody. What's the next topic?
All right, the next topic is looking at the affordability levels. This topic and the next one are intertwined. And so this one is kind of the high level discussion about what we're trying to target with this program in a general sense. And then once we bring in the next topic, which is looking at layering it with the other programs, we'll be diving into the actual AMI levels and that chart that you have in your packet materials. And so just letting you know that this section is kind of high level, and then we'll dive deeper. And so in order to look at what affordability levels we really want to be targeting with this program, we wanted to talk about where our need is, and then also how this program fits in with the other programs we have. There's a lot of conversation about, you know, what should we be targeting? What is the point of MFTE? And so that's kind of what this slide is going to go over. Currently, our program targets between 50 and 70% AMI. And we are looking at upping that, and you'll hear that in the next section. But we wanted to understand where our gaps are and how this program fits into that. And so you'll see on this chart, looking at in Bellevue, how many households we have and how many units we have at each of these ranges of AMI levels. And the 50 to 80% AMI tends to be the ranges where most cities have their MFTE programs, and where ours currently fits in that category. And you'll actually see that today in Bellevue, we actually have more units than we have households in that kind of range. And a lot of that is because we do have quite a few regulated units. A lot of those incentive units are at 80% AMI and fall in that category. So that's really helping us here. But what this also means is that a lot of our units that are in this range are actually being held by people at lower AMI levels, because you'll see if you go lower than this, we don't have nearly as many units as we have households. And so a lot of these households are having to get units that are higher AMI levels, which means that they're further cost burdened. They're paying a lot more than 30% of their income on housing, even though they're in a regulated unit. And so as an example, across all of ARCH units, and we have recently added information that this is also pretty true across Bellevue units specifically. In an 80% AMI ARCH unit, on average, the households that are in those units are actually at 55% AMI. So there's a pretty big gap there where these 55% AMI households are really cost burdened even when they're in an 80% AMI unit. And so that's really showing that our needs are for some of these deeper affordability units. Now, MFTE is not meant to target, 30% AMI. No one is arguing that. That's not how this program works. But there aren't really other programs that target between, 60 and 80% AMI. We have kind of our subsidy programs, and programs that might come out of things like 1590 are required to target 60% or below, and usually target the kind of lower bands of that range, whereas our incentive programs that are in our land use code target 80%. So between those two things, MFTE is really the only program that can target those AMI thresholds. And so that's really our sweet spot, is filling that gap between those. And then we also wanted to just kind of give a little bit of grounding in who, what jobs qualify for different AMI levels, so that people understand what AMI means instead of just numbers. These are people. As an example, I know this text is really small, so I'm just going to pull out a couple of these. A teacher who's supporting 2 kids as a family of 3 is at about 65% AMI. If you have a 3-person household where you have 2 working adults and they're both in retail sales, that's going to be about an 80% AMI unit. And if you have a single person household, just a single person who's a dental assistant, they're going to be at about 60% AMI. So you can see that those are sort of the ranges that the MFTE program could be targeting, and what types of employees that might represent. And then this is where we get into some of the scenarios. We're not going to be talking about the specific AMI levels associated with these until the next section, because that depends on how the layering happens. But we wanted to introduce this concept of, now that you've seen where the need is and kind of how MFTE fits in with our other programs, what kind of opportunities there are for creating different program update scenarios. And so we don't really have to look at exactly what these axes mean or anything, but in general, the concept here is that if we raise the AMI level, it'll be closer to market rate development, which means it costs less for the developer to use MFTE, which means that they're going to be more excited about using it, and we're probably going to get more utilization, more units produced under MFTE. That's a general trend. It depends on what other requirements we have. But along those trends, we've created 3 different sort of basic scenarios. And you'll see our existing program is down here, where it is aimed at deeper affordability, and all of the options that we've brought forth really do increase that AMI level quite a bit, in the intention of increasing our program utilization quite a bit. So you'll see, this is just laying out that the scenarios that we'll be going over next range from 3, which is somewhat similar to our existing program, but definitely fixing a few of the issues that were brought out in our outreach, and raising the AMI level some, kind of sits close to existing program, but definitely increasing utilization. And then scenario 2 bumps it up even more. And then scenario 1 is really getting it pretty close to, you know, as much utilization as you could possibly get, but also at the expense of potentially not getting as much affordability for that tax exemption, since the tax exemption is the same for all of these options. So I'm going to pause here for some general discussion. We'll be getting to the exact AMI levels of these different scenarios next, but we wanted to kind of get some discussion going about which direction you all are leaning, and which kind of target area MFTE should really be going for.
So you are asking about the AMI level here. You're going to do the scenarios next, isn't that right? Or
we're going to do the scenarios next, and there are specific AMI levels associated with those scenarios. And so for this one, we're not asking for direction on saying, oh, it's going to be 70% AMI or 80% AMI, because that's tied to the layering, and so it needs to be part of one conversation. But we are asking for a general outlook on, you know, is it more important to get more units at really high AMI levels, or is there a balance that we want to find, or do we want to be really focusing on not further cost burdening people and getting deeper affordability that really meets that need? So somewhere in the middle.
Can you show us a picture of the staff recommendation on this so we have an idea?
Yeah, so the staff recommendation is to go for, option number 2 here. This isn't necessarily tying you to the exact AMI levels that are in option number 2 in the next section, but this general concept of basically option number 2 target most buildings working for MFTE. So utilization would be much closer to 100%, but there might be a few projects that are really targeted at luxury market rents. They're really high rents, so that rent gap is really big, where we might not be targeting MFTE's use for those particular projects in order to really be able to make an efficient program that meets our needs for the other, 90% or so of projects.
Okay. I gotcha. So you've got option 1, option 2, which is your staff recommendation, option 3, and then E, which is the existing program.
Exactly.
Okay, I will call in this order Councilmember Barksdale, Lee, Stokes, Deputy Mayor Newhouse, myself, Son, and Councilmember Robertson. So Councilmember Barksdale.
Thank you. This is the most nebulous one so far. So but I'll kick it off. I think thinking about, I guess, thinking about the comment earlier, I think that Mac made that we have other tools for the deeper affordability, but acknowledging that we have the gap between the 60 and 80 that the MFTE program really helps to fill. I think wherever that fits here, I guess, is sort of what I'm thinking about. I'm not exactly sure how to respond to this particular prompt, but I guess because to me, it's not so much about quantity versus affordability. I guess it's related more to what's the need and tying that to the 60 to 80% that the MFTE program really, where it really thrives. So if that helps.
Well, so I'm wondering if you, in kind of describing what you want to see, if staff can tell you which option is going to provide you with that. What's the best option for that goal? that make sense?
That sounds good. So I guess based on what I just said, staff, is that helpful?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think with what you just described, I think that would fall in the kind of scenario 2 bucket. I mean, I think it might be like a 2.5 kind of between scenario 2 and scenario 3, depending on, how much it's 60% or 70, et cetera.
Okay. Is that good, Councilmember Barksdale?
That sounds good for now. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Lee.
Well, we all support more affordable housing. That's everybody agrees, and we have tools, as Mac mentioned, and this MFTE is one tool, okay, and we all recognize this is a tool for unit production, okay, and to do depth of affordability, that's also true. We want that as well, but that requires a different tool. Let's not use the butcher knife to cut a little chicken. I mean, something you want to use for cow. Don't use it for a chicken. And I rather find the right tool that is designed for the right purpose and work on it and focus on it. You get much better result doing that, rather than just getting a big butcher's knife trying to kill a little, chicken for dinner. That doesn't make sense. Number one, you're utilizing the wrong tool. One, you're not being effective, and you're not being efficient. So I think unless we become so desperate, we want to throw atomic bomb on killing a chicken. In that case, we're desperate. We're not there. I think we want to find the right tool, use it for the maximum purpose that we can get it. And I believe it's not to minimize, what's last one more important. It's all important. Depth, affordability, and unit production. We don't have enough unit, we recognize that. We need to do everything we can to do that. If we compromise it, we're not going to accomplish one or the other. We're not going to have the right unit, and we're not going to have the right depth, and we're not going to get where we want to go to. We'll be nowhere. So I fully support, using for the 80% or more, because that creates more unit, that creates more option, more availability. People can try to, we can't meet 100% anyway, but we need to do the best we can so that we have the opportunity and space and to meet, whatever to satisfy one piece. Then we use the other tools. Mac mentioned that we layer them. Yes, if they're appropriate to layer, use them. If they fit, use it. But
Councilmember Lee, may I ask a clarifying question? Yes. When you look at the visual here and you see the options of 1, 2, 3, and E, which one are you leaning toward? Do you see it on your screen? I would go with, they actually have 1A and 1B. Okay. Well, if you look on the visual on our screen right now, I would go 1. I would go 1. B, yeah, I would go 1. If you ask just a one simple answer. But like I mentioned, if we really desperate, want to find some opportunity to make some compromise, at the same time, not wasting the tool. Councilmember Lee, may I get some clarification here, please? Yes. Can you look at the visual that you see on your screen in front of you, and it shows balance of affordability plus quantity, and it has a graph there. Yes. And there are 4 options there. Yes. 1, 2, 3, and E. Yes. Which one are you recommending? I pick 1. I pick 1. Okay. All right. Just wanted to clarify. Councilmember Stokes.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that's helpful in this conversation, and I'll answer here in a minute, but I think the context is important. We've had these conversations in buckets or in kind of silos in a sense. And I think what we're getting to, what the staff is really getting us to think about, is that the issue of affordability and how we approach it and you know, we've all been saying this in different ways, is that there are many things, many ways to do this. So what we're looking at now is how is the MTFT the best, produces the best and makes a balance. And I think this is important for the community and other people who are advocates understand, because sometimes, you know, people want to use the MTFT in a way that, you know, without understanding, it really doesn't produce the level. So I think what is good about what's being proposed, and I think number 2, balance between quantity and affordability is the smart way to go on this. That gives us an opportunity to probably have a better program all the way around. But I think it's important to really focus on that so that we maximize the utilization of this, and you get the balance between, you know, the quantity and affordability is important. And you know, just going for 80% and no lower is, I think, is not using it in the wisest way either. And talking about going down to 50% or lower is not feasible either. So I'm comfortable with that. But what I think what I'm hoping we'll do next in this is really look at the broader picture and at some point come to an understanding of, we have all of these tools and this is how they all work together. Sometimes we look at this and each piece in its little silos, and I really appreciate the fact that we're looking at this a little bit differently. So I'm very comfortable with, and I think the smartest, the most productive way is to go with number 2, balance between quantity and affordability.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, you know, again, I guess I have to go back to what we've heard from the stakeholders in this analysis, where you know, constantly we've heard that, and my thought on this is that MFTE is a unit production tool, and therefore I would be leaning towards, as Councilmember Lee had, towards that maximizing the quantity. I mean, we can look, and I'm open to looking at those different options and the and leaning a little more towards some of those affordability options. But the fact of the matter is that the market doesn't bear it. And we're sitting here 3 years from now saying, oh, well, no one's taking advantage of it at 50% or 60% or 70% AMI, you know, then we're going to have to look at this again. And, you know, this is a real unique time in our city, and we need to maximize as many units as possible. So therefore, because I don't think it's going to pencil out any other way as it's currently structured, I think the MFTE does need to be at that 80% AMI. So again, therefore, I would be looking at that maximize the quantity as it's illustrated here. Now, our packet, we've got some different nuances here, you know, kind of between 1 and 2, and I hope we're going to have that discussion. But based on the slide that we're looking at right now, I'd be leaning more towards number 1.
Okay, great. So I see this as one of many tools, and I really appreciate that this can be layered with the incentives. And I know it is a balance. As everybody's described, you know, of course, we want as many units as possible, but we also want this to be utilized. And I think that if staff feels we can get deeper affordability below 80% AMI and still create quite a few units, then that's going to be my choice. Because it's really easy to get 80% AMI with other tools. It's hard to get lower than that. And so any chance we have an opportunity to get deeper affordability, I think we should take it. So I'm going to go with option 2. Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. You know, I was thinking about the charts that you showed with just how many 55% AMI households are renting at the 80% level because we don't have enough affordable units. And that's just heartbreaking, because I can only imagine what they're giving up in order to pay their rent. So when I think about it, I do think about using the maximizing the tools that we have in the best way that the tool within the range it allows. And so to the degree that we can really understand the financial analysis and what's possible, I agree with the mayor. We need to get to the slightly deeper affordability than the 80%. I would like to also, as I was thinking about what Councilmember Stokes said, right, that this is a one tool amongst a whole toolkit. So I'd like to understand a bit more about how this and the 1590 might kind of form a tapestry of how this works. And so to the degree that this can get down to 60%, what are the kind of terms we would need to have in order to look at getting there so that we can have that full range of housing units that are able to be built. But I also understand that if the tool isn't used, then we're not actually getting any affordable housing. So it does have to be that right balance. I guess my question would be this. When you talked about the feasibility index, were you able to find out from the people that we interviewed whether our analysis aligned with where the developers think that affordability is, and the feasibility index? So we talked about the 20 to 40% of feasibility. I would like to have that outreach, if it hasn't already happened, to make sure that our analysis aligns with where the developer community thinks it is as well, just so that we understand. Thanks.
Staff have any comment on that question?
Yeah, thank you. That definitely is how we developed our financial model. And so we actually passed over our financial model, our big Excel spreadsheet, to members of the development community. They took a look at it and said it does reflect the numbers and the kind of feasibility that they're seeing. And they were definitely essential to kind of picking that 20 to 40 range, saying, around 30 is really where they would feel really comfortable using the program at that point.
So council members I wasn't clear as to what your recommendation ultimately is here.
I'm recommending too, if we align with where the development community is, to make sure that our tool of determining feasibility index aligns with what they're seeing. And if there are some tweaks that we need to make to the feasibility index to better reflect that alignment, I want to make sure that happens, because we're using data to inform our decisions. And I want to make sure that that data and the analytics is the most reflective of the financial picture. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Robertson.
Thanks. I think we need to keep in mind the purpose of this tool. The purpose of this tool is to get us more housing and use it for fee developers, if you will, not nonprofits, although they might use it too. The purpose of this tool, from my perspective, is to get the people who are building housing in Bellevue to include some units that are affordable. And the reason that we're going through this exercise again is that the MFTE that we adopted, which was at the 50 to 70%, a lot of 70%, was not being used. You look at what is happening in Bellred, and there's developments going on out there that are using the incentive system under the land use code that are not opting into MFTE, because the MFTE AMI is too low and the parking requirement is too costly. So making sure that we can utilize this really effectively is important to me. I don't want to go through this exercise of trying to fix this and have it be something that is not used. So the data that is on slide 16 that talks about this gap between 51 and 80, that's 4 years old. And the data that I'm hearing about in the community, Microsoft has been looking at the data as part of their housing initiative. They show gaps in every income level. So we need more housing at every level. And this tool is the one that will get us some affordability on fee developers, for-profit developers. So for me, that means making sure that they use it. So I'm on number 1 here. Can you put up slide 22, please? I know we're not there yet, but that's the one that really lays it out more carefully, that shows the table. It's on the layering. So this is what the existing is the 50 to 70. So if we go somewhere around the 70, we're not going to see the utilization of this program. So like I said, I'm actually 1A. I think we should do 80 AMI citywide. That is the sweet spot. That's what we're hearing from the developers. And then when we update incentives on the land use codes, and we have a lot of land use codes that we still need to adopt, then we should look at how they're stacked. But right now I want to look at this tool as a tool in and of itself. And that means 80% AMI to me, because I want to get more affordability. And I know there's a gap. We need the lower levels as well, but the really low levels are generally built by nonprofits with government funding. And that is something that the fee developers are never going to build. They are never going to build those. So if we don't have the MFTE correctly, then what we're going to have is we're not going to get the 80% units. And then the people who might be at 60% affordability as far as their income won't have any units to go into. Yes, 80% is not ideal, but it beats the median average rent of 110% of AMI. So I think that we're better off if we do something that is very well utilized. We also need to consider the fact that what we need to do is we need to build more housing for the jobs that are coming. We have 30,000 plus new jobs that are going to be here in the next few years. If our for-profit developers aren't cranking out units, we're not going to have housing for those folks. So making sure that we are staying ahead of this, I think, is really important. And that's why I support scenario 1 and 1A in particular. I know we're going to get to that more, but I think that that's the sweet spot. That's what we're hearing, and I support that.
Thank you. Okay, let's go back to the slide we were on, and I will ask staff to respond to Councilmember Robertson's comments, because she's saying that the MFTE has been underutilized because it doesn't pencil out for the developers, and I'm reading something different from staff. So can you please weigh in on what her comments are, please?
Thank you, Mayor. How about I jump in? I think there are a number of things that are kind of getting out on the table now, and it's going to be really instructive as we get into the next section when you are starting to make some decisions or give us some direction on the various affordability levels. Just to back up a step, part of this conversation was trying to get a sense of where the council was relative to affordability, unit production, total utilization, and what that meant to you all. When we get into the next section, and it's probably most appropriate, I think, Mayor, we got what we would need from this particular discussion. But as we get into the next section, the questions around should, as the city's decided to look at all multifamily zones in the city, should that affordability level be increased from 50 or 70 to 80%? And the staff are suggesting that's exactly what we should do. So the MFTE program should now become effectively a workforce program. And the land use incentive system in the code requires 80% units. The areas that are now getting discussed is, well, what happens if you layer both programs on top of each other and give a double bonus? What happens? And so what the staff are suggesting are the first half of those affordable units that are being created through the land use code, the bonus is given in the form of value added to the developer through extra FAR and a variety of other things that occur in the land use code. And the question is, if you apply MFTE to those very same units that are already being created, is there something else, or you just get the financial incentive of the MFTE? So at any rate, we're going to get into all the metrics here right now, but we are in fact proposing that MFTE, as it goes citywide, be at a higher income level AMI wise. So really, it's the layering effect that I think you're all making most of the comments on. And then I think Councilmember Robertson made some very astute comments there about overall housing production. And as you know, we're working on that for you. And there are a lot of factors that go into creation of housing, a lot around how we do zoning just in general, and land uses and competition to buy land and all the different construction factors and so forth. So I think for this discussion, what we're trying to do is drive to what will, if you're going to build housing, how can we make MFTE a program that is very attractive to you and has enough of a financial incentive that you're going to use it and therefore provide affordable housing. The question of whether or not we're getting enough housing is a very big question that we're going to be coming back to you on, because there's a lot of variables beyond just MFTE that go into that based on our zoning scheme. So if that works for you, Mayor, maybe we can move on and have our staff walk you through the exact options and the metrics.
Okay, I'm glad to hear you say you got what you needed from this. So let's move on.
Sounds great. I apologize for having to keep that conversation nebulous, but I think it was really good to get people to think about, you know, really what the target of this program is. And it's a great segue into the next conversation. So we've talked a lot about layering, and we're going to walk through a couple different ways of looking at that. It's a fairly complicated idea, and so we're going to look at a chart and we're going to look at some graphics, and hopefully that'll speak to kind of how everybody thinks about this. But there's really just kind of three basic options about how you look at how programs can layer. Now, in our land use code, we have a number of different incentives for density where developers would provide affordability at varying percentages. It does vary quite a bit by location, but always at 80% AMI in order to get additional density on their sites. And so those are a variety of different incentives that are available in the land use code across different areas of our city. Because those vary so much, that's why our current program actually has very different AMI requirements in the different locations, because we allow a layering. So, you know, letter A here is saying retain existing layering, and that allows programs or projects to use both programs and actually have one unit work for both programs so that you can actually overlap them. And we'll explain that in a little bit more detail with a graphic here, but that's how our current program works. You could also remove that. So instead of having, you know, some units satisfy the incentive and some units satisfy the MFT program, you could keep those separate so that you actually have more total affordable units. But that does have the downside where a lot of projects aren't going to want to use both programs, because that ends up being a lot of units in total. And so that might disincentivize using one of those if you don't let them overlap. And then option C here is the kind of complicated one, which is what staff is recommending, which allows layering and simply requires that any of those units that are already affordable through another program, instead of having it, you know, get a free double bonus, basically, those units would have deeper affordability requirements. And this allows us to keep the utilization high, no matter what's happening with other programs around the city. But it also allows us to get deeper affordability in the instances where there's already affordable units happening. So we're going to walk through what that means. This is the chart that Councilmember Robertson had us bring up. I'm going to show this again after we show some graphics so that we can kind of revisit it. But walking through what these mean, you'll see at the bottom is our existing program, and then walking up that scale, number 3 would increase the AMI level and therefore increase utilization, but not as much as number 2, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how this is laid out. And you'll see the second column is the potential AMI levels. This does kind of depend on some other direction we get from staff, but this is a good baseline for this discussion. And then you'll see here this feasibility index, and what I brought up earlier when I was looking over the financial model. Basically, the target is to have this be between 20 and 40 in order for a project to 100% of the time choose to use MFTE. And so you'll see that our current program has a real issue where if they're not using a land use incentive, these numbers are negative, which means in most instances, the project is not going to work. It's not going to use MFTE. It's just going to keep everything at market rate because it doesn't pencil for them. And so that's really this issue that we are wanting to fix. Whereas we're actually seeing increased utilization of the program when projects are using the incentive, because it actually does work pretty well. You'll see these numbers are 15 to 45. That's pretty sweet spot, pretty good target. And we're seeing a lot of utilization of the program now as people start understanding how these programs layer. And so we really want to make this program work for projects that aren't using the land use incentive, and then figure out what happens with layering. And that was really what you heard at the beginning of the council meeting today from some of our stakeholders, and what we heard in our meetings with them is that they want us to make this work no matter what else you're doing, and then bring in the conversation about what happens if you're also doing something else. And so we really took that to heart in developing an option here. And so you'll see this final column is what we're going to get into now, is this layering. Most of these instances are looking at permitting the overlap, because we heard from our stakeholders they really like being able to overlap programs. It would be kind of complicated for them if they can't overlap them, because if they want to use both programs, they'd need more units in total. So most of these are letting the overlap happen. But our staff recommendation is something that I'm going to explain here with some graphics, and then jump back to this slide. So this is, a really simple graphic showing the two different scenarios we see today. We're using downtown numbers just as an example so that we're focused on one piece here. On the left is a market rate building that's at about 110% AMI. And on the right is a building that is also using the incentive that's available downtown, which means some of those units are already affordable at about 80% AMI. And that's going to be about 8% of the units, though it can vary. And so this is buildings that aren't using MFTE. What we require is that buildings that are using MFTE have 20% of their units to be affordable at 70% AMI. And so for the project that is not doing any other affordability, there's a pretty big cost from going from totally market rate to 20% affordable. Whereas the project that already has some affordability, there's less cost. So you'll see that this project, it's going to be more feasible to use MFTE than it is for a project that's not already affordable through this other program. And so right now, these two kind of project scenarios cost the developer different amounts to use MFTE, but we're giving them the same tax exemption. And that's why these projects over here really aren't using MFTE as much, because it's not penciling for them. And so staff is recommending changing this a little bit. So this is scenario 2, the approach where we still allow layering, but it's tweaked a little bit. These are the same two projects. And instead of having them have the same requirement, we're suggesting they have different requirements. So the market rate building that's not using any other programs, now it gets bumped up to 80% AMI. Just like you heard at the beginning, there's a real interest in moving that number up to 80%, not just in downtown, but across all areas of the city. And so that is what scenario 2 is recommending, that our baseline be moving it up to 80% AMI. And that's great. It pencils a lot better than the previous program. But what about this other project? And so we're recommending that, because this other project already has units that are affordable, rather than just giving them those affordable units for free in this calculation, we're saying, well, what if you make those units that are already affordable through this other program deeper affordability at 50% AMI? It would cost the same as this other project, but we would get some variety in the affordability levels. You still in total have 20% of the units are affordable, but you get some portion of them are at 50% AMI, and the rest are still at that 80% AMI. And I know, Mayor, you did ask us earlier about what happens when MFTE ends. And so basically when MFTE ends, these buildings revert back to these top kind of scenarios, because the 12 years of MFTE affordability ends, but the land use incentive affordability remains. And so they would just revert back, and you would still have some units be available at 80% AMI.
You'd lose your 50%, but you'd retain your 80%.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. Is that your full? Oh, you're still going. Keep going.
No, that's basically what we have. So basically, this is just saying that now this is the same cost to the owner, and our baseline is moving everything up to 80%, but we are making it cost the same, but still have kind of getting affordability for that exemption. So, and then this is just kind of bringing this back up for your discussion here. We also have a slide on direction, but I think it'll be helpful for you to have this up for your conversation.
And Mayor, I guess just as you pose the questions, question 1 we think is the council okay with standalone MFTE being an 80% AMI program? Because that will heavily influence financial metrics around the layering effect. So, and I know a number of council members have already posed their thoughts on that, but it'd probably be good to get some clarity on that and then move into the, what does everybody think about a layering conversation?
Okay, so I'm going to start and then we'll go Councilmember Robertson Stokes, Deputy Mayor Noonhouse, on Lee and Barksdale. So thank you for the clarification at the end there. I think this is great. I think that a baseline of 80% AMI, that I'm going to add the layering, sorry, that you can then layer upon to bring it down to a deeper affordability is exactly what we need to do. But I will tell you that the only way this is going to work for us is if we have very clear instructions to our developers. So it's got to be really easy for a developer to come in and say, I'm doing this residential project, and for staff to say, have you thought about using the MFTE and all these incentives that are possible, and really make it clear the scenario, you know, what the outcome is and what is expected of the developer and how that's going to work with his project. Otherwise, it's going to be way too confusing. So I'd like some assurance that we can, whatever we decide, do it in a way that's very clear for the people who will be utilizing the tools, and that you expect that we will actually get more utilization.
So Mayor, maybe I can comment on that, because I think that will likely come up in your next conversation about parking. As I think everyone on the council knows, we use Arch as our implementing agency. And one of the things we have identified here is that we would like to be much more overt about communication around how our program in Bellevue works, so that answers are going out, you know, in a way that everybody understands and is easier to understand. So we are doing some thinking about different tools to accomplish that, and we'll be ready to report back to the council just in general about our affordable housing strategy and how we can tell our story of what we do in Bellevue. Because it is very different than some of the other Arch cities. And so we'll do a better job at that. And so we want to talk to you about that separately too with the affordable housing update.
Thank you. I think my goal is to see something like the online permit system, that there be a bunch of menus that are easy to follow, that provide guidance on how to tap into these opportunities. Councilmember Robertson.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with Mayor Robinson about making this easy and clear and understandable. I think that that's really good direction. Can you please go back one slide? Because I have a question about how this is going to work. So the incentive system, when someone utilizes a land use incentive for affordable housing, they get something, right? They get higher height, higher FAR, more units, right? Okay, so this is not really the same cost to the owner on the left and on the right, because in the first one, if they have market rate without the land use incentive, so maybe let's just use round numbers, they can build, say, 100 units on that site. When they use the land use incentive, so they can build, say, 108 units on that site. And the 8 extra units have to be forever at 80 AMI. So then the first building has 100 units, the second has 108, and then you take 20% of that, that would be 20 units under the first scenario on the left, would be 80% AMI. And what's 20% of 108? I guess it'd be about 22. You might get 22 units under the second scenario, because wouldn't it be 20% of the full building, isn't it, under MFTE? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so these aren't exactly the same.
But there you have a property tax exemption, right?
Right, they both would get the MFTE, but under the stacked incentive, the benefit to the public is that you would have not just the 20, you wouldn't just have 20% of the base scenario, you'd have 20% of the increased unit count scenario. So if you take a 500 unit building, it's even more. That's, you have 100 units under scenario 1, and you have, 120 or something under scenario 2. So that's a lot more units, and that benefits the public because we get more affordable units if they are stacked. And that is if we just kept it at 80. So, I just wanted to point that out because I didn't think that this was really clear. I think when you come back again, if we're having this discussion, an actual example of like a 350 unit apartment building might be really helpful to see what you get. And we have different land use incentives in different zones in the city. And so, you know, I support having a stacking. I support allowing people to build bigger, denser units by providing affordable housing. And I support allowing them to use MFTE to build even more. So that said, I'm not sure if this going it to 50% on those 8% of the units is really the right number or not. I personally would like to see the stacking decoupled from the MFTE. And as we bring forward land use plans, we take those up one by one because they're just different across the city. And I think it's going to slow down the implementation of MFTE and potentially slow down the East Main, Wilburton, and Bellred look back if we try to put these all together right now. I think that we should definitely keep working on that. But for me, I want to just do 80% AMI on the MFTE, allow stacking, and then we'll figure out the incentives later. Because we're not losing anything by that, and we're not giving an extra gift to the developer. We're going to actually get more affordable units if it's stacked, even if they're both at 80%.
So Councilmember Robertson, just for clarification, when you say stacking, is that the same as layering?
Yeah, sorry, just a different word.
Okay, yeah. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Stokes.
This is why this is what I thought we were talking about in scenario number 2, why I thought that was the best. I understand what Councilmember Robertson's just saying, but I think that's one of those, you know, too much worried about complications down the line or something, instead of which gives us a little inaction on something. I think we should go forward on the combination, and it's going to take a little time to get the other in place. But if we put it off, we may not even get back to that. So I think that's what we should concentrate on. I don't see any real difference in the two in terms of working with the developers. In fact, I think if we want to do this, we need to do it. We need to commit to it and start working on it. Probably most of them at the beginning are going to be just the 80% all across the board. But so I think this is great. And I like the direction. I like the more information. And I guess I would have liked to have seen this kind of at the beginning, because I think you've hit on something that will really make a difference, and with this tool. And it's not everything, of course, but I think this is much more in the long run, better for the community, better for the people who need the housing, to have this layering as this is set up, and work on that. Again, I'm just concerned if we say, well, we'll look at that some other time down the line, that's what we'll do. And 5 years from now, we'll say, oh, guess we'll get around to it. So I would prefer to move forward on scenario 2 now and start making that work.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, good conversation so far. And I'm glad that we're, I think, moving in a lot of ways in the right direction in terms of Mayor, as you said it, having something, I think, very simple, something very straightforward, not overcomplicating what the city is able to offer. And in fact, even during some of the briefings that we've had, I mean, that was part of the issue with MFTE as well, where, Elizabeth detailed, part of the complication or the education of what the program is, what it isn't, how you can use it, when you can use it, et cetera. But the fact of the matter is, most of the time when they did pencil out, it didn't work. And that actually leads me to a question, Elizabeth. When you were doing your outreach with these developers, how often did you hear stories about folks that were maybe at the 60% AMI, 50% AMI, or maybe even below 50% AMI, but were still living in a 70% AMI unit?
Yeah, I think that, a lot of our outreach was towards the developer community, and we really work with Arch to understand some of that question. So we actually have Arch here to answer questions if they want to jump in on that question and kind of how often that happens.
This is Mike Stanger. I work at Arch. Do you restate the question, please?
Hi, Mike. Welcome to the meeting. My question was, how often, when you reached out or when you're working with developers, how often did they see scenarios or a family was occupying a 70% AMI unit, but were actually below 70% AMI, meaning they were at 60% AMI, 50%, or maybe even below 50% AMI?
Well, that's what we're finding to be more often the case than, frankly, than we expected. The data that Elizabeth mentioned early in the presentation is that we find it's very common for people in 80% AMI units, for example, to be, or 70, to have incomes that are more in the 50 to 60% of AMI range. And so even if they enter those units with 75% AMI income, they're already cost burdened. So the lower their income goes, the more cost burdened they already are.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's good information. Thank you. But it's still good to see folks that are able to acquire those units or be in those units, even if they're below that 70%. So, yeah, well, I have to, again, agree with my council member, my colleague, Councilmember Robertson, in terms of just keeping this simple, not over-engineering this, maximize the quantity. As far as the layering or the stacking, whatever we're going to end up calling it, my thought right now is just to maintain or retain the existing layering as it is. Thank you.
Elizabeth, can you explain what the existing layering is right now that we have?
Yeah, the existing layering is basically, if we go back this way, where either project has the same requirement. And so the projects that are already using the incentive, it's going to be a little bit easier to use MFTE. And that's represented in scenario 1A, I believe, in your packet.
Gotcha. Yeah, be nice if it was all on one slide. Okay. Okay, sorry, I just have to write a note here.
You can see that here.
I think another thing maybe to point attention to here, Mayor, is we're talking about what the existing program is. The existing program is a 50 to 70% AMI program, which by its nature is meant to drive the deeper affordability than we do in our land use incentive process. So you really have a two-parter here. You're raising the base program to be consistent with the land use incentive process, well, if that's the action you take, and then discussing what to do about the value of the tax exemption itself with the housing. So the housing itself is being created by two different programs in the scenario you're discussing. And so the question is, do both programs work if they stand alone separately? We believe the answer to that question is yes, if you make changes to MFTE to make it an 80% program. And then question B is, since those same units are in fact being created, you're giving a bonus in the form of not just density, but also FAR or other kinds of things in the land use code process, and a financial bonus through the tax exemption process.
And this is an optional thing for developers. They're not required to layer, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So we've tried to design it so that both programs could work independently and work very well together should someone choose to do that.
Gotcha. Thank you. Councilmember Zahn.
Yeah, I really appreciate this table and those examples. I mean, I think it would be helpful to also have the example with actually numbers of units, but I can do the calculation in my head with percentages, so I do understand that. What I like about what you're proposing is that each of them can act alone, but with the layering, we actually get more. Because at the end of the day, what I kept thinking about is this is a values discussion. What are we trying to do? We're both trying to build more housing. We want more housing at all different levels, and we want to right-size the tool. I do want to confirm one thing, which is that I thought I read in the packet that even with the existing MFTE, we thought we were only getting about 15 to 20% usage, but with these 2 additional projects, we're at more of 40 to 50% of the projects are using MFTE. Can you talk about that? Because there seemed to be this implication that with the current MFTE program that we modified a little over a year ago, that we were not actually getting units.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Councilmember Zahn. I think that's a really important point that, all of these options, 1A, 1B, 2, and 3 are all increasing our AMI levels and making this program much easier for developers to use. And our existing program is getting better utilization than I think the assumption was when we first launched. A lot of our outreach was learning about where the clarity could come in, how much better outreach we could do to make sure people understand the program, all of that, plus just the longer a program is in use, the better utilization it tends to have. We've seen that in other cities as well as people get more familiar with it. So all of that is adding up to us having a much more successful program, even with these really deep affordability levels at 50 to 70% AMI. And so I think that is a really important point that, our staff recommendation is increasing this quite a bit and really should see much higher utilization and many more affordable units generated.
Yeah, and I had to write this down because in these 3 different areas, the MFTE was different for each one. And so what I really like about what you're recommending is it is streamlining and simplifying and making things much more clear. MFTE alone, 80%, which is actually higher than the 70% and sometimes 50 and sometimes 60 that we currently have to try to navigate. So all of them would be the same. And then I also like the fact that when I look at this chart, what I appreciated about it is that whether you go with MFTE alone or you do the layering, the feasibility index is reasonable, it's fair, that we're looking at a level of profitability that still makes sense without having the balance tip so far that we're talking about 75 to 160% if we look at 1A. And I'm not sure that that's the value balance that we're trying to get to in the city. And then to the point about taking up the streamlining and looking at the MFTE differently in each place that was recommended earlier. If we're trying to go to streamline and clear, I don't know that that's really streamline and clear. And I also don't think that's acting with urgency. So if we're really serious about this, then let's get going with number 2, which actually is the right balance of making sure that developers have the profitability that they want, and that if they want to use the layering, that we at the city are getting the benefits to building the kind of affordability to the levels that are really important for our community. So I appreciate all this extra work that you've done to really make clear about what we're looking at, and the fact that you've spent the time developing the financial model, vetting it with the developer community to make sure that we're doing the right thing. I think the tougher question we're going to have, which is later on, is the parking and how we really look at how parking plays into this. But what you recommended right now is the most streamlined and clear. And so you don't have to remember, which zone you have different levels, and we're actually raising it to 80% if it's just pure MFTE. Thank you.
Councilmember Lee.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. As we all notice, this is a very interesting, complex issue. And, that's the reason why I think it's important that, I appreciate the staff talking to the stakeholders, the developers and business folks and so on. And I'm not sure if you had gone through all these discussions. Perhaps you did, but I'm not privy to all the detail you have gone through with them. We just spent now the last hour talking about this, and the first thing I heard is there are many tools, okay, and each tool does something. We know that MFTE production, and then the others, land use incentive, whatever, for maybe in depth deeper. I think they're all good. This all our goal. The city council wants to do all of them. The key to me is still, I said earlier, is we have a tool and we need that we know what it's used for. And we don't have a simple, easy answer yet. We know it's a tool, but you mentioned that if it can be used over time, we'll learn more about it. And before we actually use them, know however they will work, whether they will work or not effectively to meet our goals. These are all just predictions, right? We need to talk to the stakeholders. So I'm not sure if you have, and obviously they may have told you what they're comfortable with. So my question is, when you mentioned option 2, you talk about layering. That's a very complicated. Mac said earlier too, when you talk about layering, you are complicated the whole process. One tool works well for this, but if you add another tool on it, what is it? Which one is actually working to get you the result you want to get? You don't know. So you never give each tool. You never refine it. You never test it. You never make a better tool to get what you wanted. I always believe that, we are providing you policies. So we need to know just the tool you have makes sense. I like that. But how are you going to apply it? That's the crux of the whole thing. If you apply it wrongly, it's not going to get you the result. You're just going to complicate it. You're just going to compromise what you want to accomplish. And at the end of the day, whether you get the result or not, you don't know which tool actually works, in what combination. You don't know. You're just layering it on. It gets really mushed up. So my suggestion is, we got a tool. We know what to do with it. Let's use it and see how well it does work. And then you can, yes, I agree. We can try different things. If it doesn't meet whatever goal, we can match them out, then we know. But at least the tool you got is getting what you wanted to, because we need all of these. All of these we need. So I'm leaning. So number question I have is, what do the stakeholders, if you have discussed all this with them, and do they think that, yes, this will work? And from their experience, that will work? If they haven't done that, they're just guessing, or they think that, I heard this, that economically it will not work, with this MFTE as an affordability tool. So don't mess it up trying to use that. And if you layer something on it, you don't know whether it does work or it doesn't work. So I think I'd rather you focus on that. And 2, I think it's important. You mentioned about you using the using the tool we have now. We've been trying to use Bellevue corridor. We're trying to use multifamily tax exemption tool, but it's not working, right? Because we know there's certain things, we haven't got many units built in Bellevue corridor. So I think we need to focus on that. How do we make that work? First, let's figure it out. Once we know it works, then apply it. Then if it works to what we expected, or maybe it doesn't, then put other tool on it, layer on. Then we can see how is it going to make it work or not. Then at least we know what works and what doesn't, and how we can test it or we can figure it. It's going to take step by step, proving that we can do it and we know what we have and then what we can expect to get. Otherwise, how can we make policy decisions? Just say, well, we don't really know it. Hey, maybe it's all good. Let's throw an atomic bomb, drop it on there. Everybody goes away happy. No, it doesn't. We have to be deliberate. We have to use data, use analysis, know the needs, and figuring out how each one can,
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Thank you.
That's my point. So I'm
going to let staff.
Let me just finish up by saying I would support Councilmember Robertson's thought and proposal, and that's the way we should go about it.
Thank you. So that's 80% AMI and maintaining the existing layering program that we have now. But Councilmember Lee made a lot of statements. Would staff like to comment on any of those?
Thank you, Mayor. I think I will weigh in, and then I think it would be helpful if Elizabeth or Emil could weigh in a little too. So a question was, how did we engage with our stakeholders? And I think an important part of this discussion is this going to work? Is it going to get used? And one of the reasons that we reached out to a number of different communities that are involved in this business, both at the Chamber of Commerce and their plush committee and the developers themselves, is to find out what kind of return they would really want. I mean, what are the real financial metrics that would make this program effective for them? And it was a combination of our staff and that group that looked at this feasibility index and started saying, what would it take for this program to be effective for you to want to use it? So that's how we landed on those numbers between 20 and 40. And I think I'll stop there and ask Elizabeth and Emil. They were really spearheading this effort for us with those different groups on, because I think we had a slide up earlier. There was 20 some odd different developers and of course monthly plush meetings. Maybe you can speak to a few of the actual individuals and how that went, which I think answers Councilmember Lee's questions about how engagement occurred.
Yeah, so I can weigh in there. Thanks, Mac. So we've been meeting with the plush group on a monthly basis since back in October, as well as significant meetings with the development community and the BDA. I think we view our role as the staff is to bring the policy discussions and policy issues for council consideration, as has been discussed tonight. There is a trade-off between the affordability levels and how much the system is going to be used. So that's why we wanted to have this kind of methodical discussion through those trade-offs. So we do think that scenario 2, as our recommendation, is going to be much more heavily used as the existing system, but it does balance meeting some of the city's policy objectives in getting that higher usage.
I would just add in there that when you look at the feasibility index numbers for scenarios 1A, 1B, and 2, the minimum is pretty similar for all of these scenarios. And the feedback we got from the development community is that if it's over 20, that's going to trigger use of MFTE. And so raising this up to 160 or 75, anywhere in there, that's not going to get more use of MFTE. It's just going to give a bigger ratio between the tax exemption and the number of units. So the ultimate utilization we get between these three options will be relatively similar. There will be, minimal additional utilization for scenarios 1 and A. It's just really what that ratio is changes.
Okay. Can we move on to Councilmember Barksdale? Go ahead, Councilmember.
All right, thank you. So Mac actually took the words right out of my mouth about the feedback on the model, because when I get the reaction to the different scenarios, but if there's feedback from the development community that the model works and the model was used to come up with these scenarios, then to me that it makes sense that we can, in some ways at least, earlier on and then test it like in the wild, if you will, trust the scenarios here. So I really like this creative approach that staff took to come up with these scenarios and creating the model to inform the creation of the scenarios and help us better get an idea of the different options. I would say, obviously, the next steps are like having this available for developers to use and testing it. Like when I say in the wild, I just mean having developers start using it. So similar to what's been said already in terms of support for making it available for use and start using it and seeing how it performs. In terms of making it easier for developers, I think it would be awesome to provide that the model or the spreadsheet as a calculator on the website so that they can get an idea similar to what you were mentioning, Mayor. But making that available so they can run scenarios with that calculator themselves and decide. And the last point I'll make is, we talk about flexibility, and I think the fact that it is optional for developers to choose whether or not to use MFTE and or layer on land use incentives is providing a flexible option for developers. So.
Thank you. So I know Councilmember Robertson would like to make another comment. Are there any other, if you could raise your hand? I see Councilmember Stokes would also like to make a comment. So go ahead, Councilmember Robertson.
Thank you. So, I think what's getting a little bit lost in this, because we don't have any actual examples, is what will happen if we allow layering without this deeper affordability, and how functional this will be if we require the deeper affordability for the overlap. In some parts of the city, you cannot build a reasonably sized development for multifamily without using the land use incentive. Like Bellred, you have to unlock that zoning with the affordability. If we then start making those be at 50%, we may have people just not develop there. And so my understanding is that while the development community did bless the model, it had not, this layering was not part of what was blessed. And so the 80% AMI is kind of where everyone landed on that. I've been working on a little bit of calculations myself as we've been sitting here to figure out, okay, what if we layer, everything's at 80%. So on a 500 unit building, if it's just 8% land use incentive, you get 540 units instead of 500. 40 of those units are affordable for the life of the project. If you layer—
At what AMI?
At whatever the land use incentive is, it's
80%.
70. Well, it's not 80% everywhere. In Bellred, I think it's 70. So whatever the percentage is under the land use code. So you'd get those for the life of the project. And if then they used MFTE, 108 of the 540 units would be affordable at 80%. So you'd have 108 units affordable at 80% for, or whatever the, if the land use incentive is less, it'd be less for those units for 12 years and then forever for the land use incentives. If you only use MFTE, you would get 100 units out of 500 at MFTE. They're good for 12 years. So instead of 108 units, you get 100, but they're not affordable forever. If you stack them with only the land use incentive without stacking, you just get 40 units. So we're talking, we need more units. We need more workforce housing for all the people coming. To me, it's you get more if they're allowed to stack, even if we don't do the deeper affordability. And because our land use code in different parts of the city is different for the incentive system, and because that's going to be changing, I'm comfortable with stacking under the incentives that are there now without having to fiddle with them. And as we update, because I don't want to slow things down, as we update those, then we can deal with the incentives. That makes the most sense to me. It may not be perfect, but as one of my former colleagues used to always say, is let's not make perfect the enemy of the good, and let's get more units. We need more units, and we need more units that are affordable for all these workers that are coming to Bellevue. I mean, that to me is the thing. We need to have this program utilized, both that we want them to utilize incentives and MFTE, because that's how we get, number one, more units, and number two, more affordable units. So that's my comments. Thank you. And when it comes back, I guess I would just close with when it comes back, because I'm not going to ask everyone to check my math, although I did it in Excel. Can we have staff give us some actual scenarios of developments that if they use the land use incentive, it's this. If they use the land use incentive plus MFT, it's that. If they just use MFTE, it's this other thing. I think that would be really useful for me, and I expect it would be useful for the rest of us as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead, Councilmember Stokes, and then you, and then Councilmember Lee. So I agree. It would be nice to have a visual of what these scenarios look like. But I'll tell you, the one thing that we're missing in Bellevue is housing circulation. We're missing the opportunity for people to get into, move up into more expensive properties and to move down into less expensive properties. We're missing the opportunity for people to downsize from their single family homes. And we're missing the opportunity for people to buy in first-time home buyers and then move up the ladder into maybe a single family home. And we have to have a whole range of affordability in order to have that housing ecosystem that makes a city healthy. And so when you talk about how many cost-burdened individuals are living in 80% AMI, but really can only afford for 50% AMI, and I think about creating more 50% AMI housing, making that available to people, I see those people dropping down the ladder into something they can better afford and freeing up the 80% AMI, therefore increasing the amount of 80% AMI stock in the city. So to me, what's being recommended here serves all that I think we need to have in Bellevue. Councilmember Stokes.
First thing I want to say is I agree with what you just said. I appreciate that very much. I think that's the way we need to look at it. We talk about, our role is to do policy, not to micromanage or figure out how to do these things. Our policy is exactly what you talked about, Mayor. It's to maximize affordable housing for our residents. And the way to do that is not to stick to something and say, well, we've done this, let's just keep plugging away at that. We're being innovative, and we talk about this all the time about Bellevue and innovation and moving forward and taking risk, trying to serve things the best, people the best we can. And we've had a strong incentive and policy for a long time, at least since, Newman in 2017, to do more affordable housing. And we asked staff, and we have staff to help us do that and put together a program and figure out how to do this. And staff has done that. They've talked with the community. We can pencil this, we can pencil that. The fact of the matter is what the staff has recommended has been worked with the community, and is not there's a lot of flexibility in it. And it's a program that can go forward. I have full confidence that the staff can take this program with the target number 2, put it together. And I appreciate that Councilmember Robertson is seems to be saying that, okay, we can make this work. And it's not an either or, it's a combination. I think actually it's a very well thought out, very bold and thing to do. And again, it's one of these things that, we can go bigger, or we can just sit on our status quo and kind of worry about it. And so I think we've come up with a really good way to implement the policy. And that means that the city government is working well. So I'm happy with this, and I think they can make it work. And we just, it's kind of fun to agonize through these things and take it apart and everything else. But I think when it comes down to it, good presentation, we've done our job, the staff's doing its job, and working together, we can do the job for all our citizens.
Thank you. Councilmember Lee, and then Councilmember Zahn.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think we all can agree that affordable housing is important, and we talk about, how we can accommodate all types of housing for all types of people. And we know that the lower wage people need to be very much a part of it, and so are others. And the key is, though, we are going to have 25, 30,000 new people coming to Bellevue to live, and so no matter how many we build, we need more. It's not enough. So it's providing a variety of housing. So we started many years ago, like Mr. Stokes mentioned. We've come up with great programs and ideas. And MFTE is one of which, and we tried it. And we find out it hasn't worked the way it is built. It's a great tool. We still know it's a good tool. So we have engaged with the development community. Excellent. I think that's all the right thing. And they have actually given their input, and they have made a suggestion. They prefer one, and then there may be other ways we can do it. So first of all, in order to actually have this program as a viable program, we got to have housing first. We got to have unit first. Without unit, if we're just talking, we can't. If we don't have a unit for anybody, nobody can live there, whether there be, whatever. And I think the mayor said it very well. We need to provide lower wage housing, but that it's not this particular tool we're talking about. This is not what we are talking about here as what is appropriate. The city's effort, we can do it. Because I think Councilmember Robertson mentioned, we have to have nonprofits. We have to have other programs. We have to have real subsidies to provide for people to live in certain of these housings, which are not economically. I think I remember way back when somebody said, this is really a economic balance. If you don't give the developers the right numbers, they're not going to build it. So it's a reality, right? And we cannot force them, but we can do it. So to do is developing a tool. We have a tool. The tool is to build more units. When you have units, then we can work with the units. Like I agree with Councilmember Robertson. Then we can start looking at layering the way whatever. Then we can say, well, we have a unit there now, but it's not quite right. We have numbers, but we're not going deep enough to get the people who are on low income. What do? Then we can come up with other tools. We can use land use incentives. We can use other things that are designed specifically to work together. So at least we have a basis, have the housing stock to work with. Otherwise, like now, we don't have a single unit built with this program. That means it doesn't matter. We can tell us, we need to provide the lower income folks, but there's no unit built there because people are not building it. So what can we do? We have to, the city going to build ourselves? Well, maybe, but that's the decision we have to make as policy. But at this moment, we have made a decision. So I agree that we'll make the units, then we'll look at other tools, how to make a unit work better. Some of the suggestions the development community has is, let's look at parking. Let's look at—
Councilmember Lee, we're going to get to that. Can you just—
I know, but I'm just saying that you cannot look at this on its own. We're talking about layering. We're already talking about it. So it's not easy. It's complicated.
Okay. Thank you.
So we need to make sure, in order to avoid, unnecessary mistakes and decision we're making we haven't thought through. We got to see the bigger picture. And so I'm sticking out this. Let's work on what we know, what can do works, and then work the other tools, and then we can layer them up. We can figure out how one can complement each other. Then we know it's successful.
I understand. Thank you very much. I just want to give staff, we keep hearing some of the council members say that the existing MFTE program is not working, that it's not being used, that we haven't created any units with it. And I'm hearing staff say something different. Can you please clarify how about that, or reiterate what you said in the presentation at least?
Sure, Mayor. Yeah, the existing program is not getting as much utilization as we all would have hoped for. And a big reason is a standalone MFTE requirement right now is much deeper affordability. So proposing changes to the base MFTE program to raise it to 80% is going to have a very substantive impact on utilization of the program overall.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Zahn.
Yeah, thank you. I just keep thinking about the fact that Bellevue is a great place to live. And I do, as I was thinking about the comments that have been made, MFTE is not new to Bellevue. We've already tweaked it once. And we are now looking at, based on what we've learned, as Max says, making adjustments so that it can be better. So this is not new and untested. We are learning all the time. And I was also thinking about the fact that, earlier there was discussion about the fact that we need to have data, we need to do outreach, and we need to do analysis. And I would say yes, yes, and yes. Staff has done an amazing job of gathering data, of doing outreach, of creating the financial models, of reaching out and showing the developer community those models to make sure that their analysis is sound. That has been done. So if we are going to do more analysis paralysis, that is not going to move us in the direction we need to go about going big and acting with urgency about building all levels of housing. And when I think about what makes an effective MFTE program, we've gotten the feedback on the model. And I believe that what staff is recommending in option 2 is a yes and that is going to get us both the workforce housing at the 80%, as well as the deeper affordability if developers want to do the layering. And I would really just recommend that if we can move to the next topic of getting to the parking, which I still believe is the biggest sticky point, and, you know, value and acknowledge and appreciate all the hard work a staff has done working with so many of the community and the developers and the plush group to get us to this point. What I'm hearing is that we are asking questions about whether the data was gathered right, whether we've done analysis, whether we've done outreach, and I believe the answer to all of those have been yes, yes, and yes. I will just say that I appreciate Councilmember Robertson asking for some examples, because I do think examples are helpful for us to understand. And yet I still believe that at the end of the day, number 2 is the right balance that's going to get us to the value that we say we want about building housing and affordable housing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Zahn. So at this point, we have 4 council members. Well, every council member supports a baseline of 80% MI. We have 4 council members liking option 2 and 3 council members liking option B. I think all the council members would like to see some visuals, but those different look next time. You can bring some scenarios for us to see. Going back, we have a majority of the council who want to expand MFTE into all areas that allow multifamily. Have a majority of council members who want to stick with the family size unit requirements, but extend the MFTE to also 1-bedroom and studio developments. And that's where we are right now. We still have, I know that the MFTE is a little bit of a moot point. Maybe we should go over that. And then the last thing we have to discuss, I believe, is the parking requirements. I think we should do a hard stop at 9 o'clock, move on to their session items, knowing that we have another study session where we can do the parking. So if we can do some of the parking and get some questions so that you can bring them back to us at the next study session, we'll do that. But would you like to go ahead and just go over the length of the MFTE?
Sure, Mayor, that sounds like a good plan. This one, it should be pretty quick. This is really just in your council packet. You may have noticed that staff came up with a potential option that could be added on top of any other tweaks that we just discussed to allow for affordability for the life of the project. That was something that council had expressed some interest in, just knowing if that was a possibility. And under the current state regulations, the way that would be completed would be in introducing an 8-year program. We would maintain our 12-year program with any of the other changes per council direction. But we could introduce an 8-year program, which gives us a lot more flexibility around affordability requirements. And so we could say, as an example of what that might look like, that a developer could get an 8-year tax exemption in exchange for providing about 8% of the units to be affordable at similar levels to what we were just discussing for the life of the project. And so this is an option we haven't delved into in a lot of detail. We're interested in, if this is something that council is interested in, but we do recommend that we revisit this at the next study session, because there is state legislation that is moving through the system right now that might provide an alternative similar to this, but that would be a little bit different to extend the affordability. So we wanted to let council know about that, as well as kind of just present this 8-year option as food for thought. So direction on this is really just requesting that council let us know if this is something that you're interested in us bringing back once we have a little bit more information on the state legislation as well.
Okay. Well, I think that's kind of, it may be making a huge assumption. It seems kind of obvious that that would be the case, but please raise your hand if you don't feel that way. I'm hoping that wasn't a raised hand, Councilmember Stokes.
I was going to give a thumbs up.
Oh, thumbs up. Okay, great. So, okay, we will have you bring that back when we get some current information on what's going on at the state level. And so we have half an hour left that we could delve into the parking, and I'm hoping that you can do a presentation that we can get a taste of what you're proposing here, and then we can offer some questions or comments tonight, but have some time to think about it further for when you bring it back. I'm assuming that we'll need another session on this. So do you think that's enough time for you to do a presentation, half an hour on the parking?
Yes, I think we can certainly do that.
Okay, let's try it.
So what we've actually put together in our slides here is following that general approach. We knew that this is a complicated topic and that there were a lot of things to cover. So our recommendation is to give you a high level of what's happening with parking today, what our general recommendation is, and then really dive into the details of what that would look like, and once we've gotten a little bit of direction from you today. And so this was definitely meant to be a two-parter from the start. So to kind of ground us in what's happening today with parking, it's really important to differentiate between two things that I think we've heard confused a lot when we're talking about parking costs with MFTE. The existing land use code is where the total number of parking stalls that a development must build is defined. MFTE does not impact that in any way. So when we hear about the expensive construction of stalls, which are very expensive, especially below grade, MFTE doesn't impact that. Those stalls have to be built to a certain minimum based on the land use code. And the MFTE program is really just asking whether we should be charging the affordable tenants for use of those stalls. And so we had quite a bit of research in the packet looking at kind of parking need, and also a little bit of that here, but I'll gloss through it a little bit as a matter of time. But we're really asking whether these tenants that have cars and need them to get to work should be paying for the parking on top of their affordable rent, and therefore increasing their overall kind of costs above that 30% threshold, or even further if they're already further cost burdened, or if we should find kind of a middle ground where potentially some of those costs are covered. And so that's really what the heart of this discussion is. It's not a matter of how many parking stalls need to be built, but really who's paying the monthly cost for that parking, which tends to be around $150 a month. And it's also worth noting that $150 a month is equivalent to about 7 to 8% of AMI level. So if you're looking at the cost to the affordable tenant, if they have to pay for parking in addition to their affordable rent, it's similar to asking them to pay an additional 8% higher AMI level, but including parking. So you can look at that as a little bit of a trade-off. So this is the slide that looks at the need. It was laid out in a little bit more detail in your packet, but really what we're showing here is that we've reached out and really looked at Bellevue tenants who are in the affordable income ranges and looked at, do they need cars? What percentage of them need cars? Is it for working, et cetera? And what we really found is that these tenants need their cars. They're very important for them. Generally, it's to get to work. About 3/4 of employees that are earning less than $50,000 in Bellevue drive to work. And a lot of these households have more than one adult. So if you have two adults and they both drive to work, it's really likely that that household is going to need a car. And we see that because 91% of the households on the ARCH list who are looking for housing specifically in Bellevue have checked the box that says that they need parking as part of that housing. So we're seeing this need. And so our baseline is that these tenants have cars, and that's not going to go away immediately. And so the question is, who's paying for that parking, and how is that handled? And so, it's also worth pointing out that we as staff do recommend a change to our current approach, which generally allocates one parking stall for each affordable unit, because our land use code minimum parking ratios are decreasing in a lot of cases. And so for a lot of these buildings, there aren't enough parking stalls for every unit, whether market rate or affordable, to get a parking stall. And so it doesn't make sense to have a higher ratio of stalls allocated to the affordable tenants than to the market rate tenants. We're looking to get some sort of more even distribution. And then we're also asking for direction for council on how that might be achieved and where that cost comes from. And so it's worth kind of thinking about the history of affordable housing and thinking about the fact that when these AMI levels and this approach of limiting housing costs to 30% of a household's income was developed federally, that was when parking was always incorporated into housing costs. And so that 30% was calculated based on including parking. And so this is really the question that we're asking for direction on today. Again, we will definitely come back and discuss this more at the next study session. But what we're asking is, should parking be partially incorporated into the affordable rent totals? Because we recognize it should not be fully incorporated any longer. And the question is really around whether it should be partially incorporated or if it should be fully decoupled. And so staff is recommending that it should be partially incorporated. And there are a number of ways of doing that we can bring back to council, and we've discussed a lot. But one thing to note is that in order to partially associate those two things, we could actually tie it to the access to transit, so that developments that have good access to transit maybe don't get as much parking apportioned to the affordable tenants as developments that have less access to transit, and that could be achieved by linking it to that overall parking ratio. And that this is really the approach that ARCH is moving towards for all the other ARCH cities. Currently, all of the ARCH cities have that same baseline approach of having one parking stall distributed to each affordable tenant. The alternative would be to completely decouple those costs and have parking cost the same for everyone, and therefore have affordable tenants pay for parking on top of their baseline affordable rent. The one benefit to doing this, in addition to lowering costs for the developer, is that this would mean that we could potentially rebalance the AMI levels a little bit to account for that difference in cost, because the developer is saving money on not providing that parking. So it basically just changes some of the inputs in that financial model, but that approach would also be inconsistent with what other ARCH cities will be doing. So those are kind of some of the limited pros and cons of this approach, and this is pretty high level. So we're really asking for direction on whether we should pursue an approach that partially incorporates the parking into the affordable rents.
Mayor, I might just add one more comment, because I think there is still some misunderstanding out in the community about this part of the program. The city has approved multiple development projects, MFTE applications, with less than one stall per unit assigned. So that is true. And I think what we're seeking from the council here is, because to Elizabeth's point, is we look at a lot of things, our transportation policy and our what we call modal split, getting people out of cars citywide, making the whole city function better from a utility infrastructure standpoint. we're reducing the amount of parking we're allowing to be built in these buildings. So the question then is, under what circumstances would we allow the affordable owners to not have access to parking? And so what we've done is go to a prorated schedule in a few where it's closer to the land use code requirement. And in one, we simply removed the requirement altogether. It was a downtown project almost directly next to the new light rail and bus transit facility. So just historically, I thought you should all, because that issue is likely to come up, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have anything on that as well.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go with Councilmember Robertson, followed by Zahn, Deputy Mayor, Neuenhuis, Councilmember Stokes, Lee, Barksdale, and then me. So Councilmember Robertson.
Thanks. So I'm going to go back to why we have the MFTE and what our goals are. For me, my goal is to get more of the missing middle housing. We have at least 30,000 new jobs coming in the next few years. And if we want those folks to not drive in from far away and clog our streets, we need to have housing for them to live here so they can work in the city in which they can live in the city in which they work. So from that perspective, I think we should be looking at this program not for the people that we have in Bellevue today, but for the people that are going to live in Bellevue tomorrow. And so the data that was provided, which is from 14 to 18, it's a little stale and it's nationwide, it looked like. So I think that what would be more relevant would be the data from the multifamily housing in Seattle, where it's a dense city, lots of tech workers coming into these jobs, and see what utilization of parking they have. So people who want to live here, it's because they are working here. I mean, the people we're planning for. And so if they are being, if these units are being developed right near transit and they can jump on a bus to go to their job, I think that the need for the parking is going to be diminished. And that's reflected by the fact that we are reducing the parking for multifamily in general, especially when they're on high capacity transit lines. So for me, I don't think that parking should be something that is included in a housing cost, because one of the goals that this council has had from an environmental, from a transportation, from a land use, is to get people out of their cars and get them onto transit, get them walking, biking. I mean, we can't do that perfectly, but we need to plan for ways to implement the goal. The other thing that I think, so I don't think that parking, I think it should be completely decoupled. That is the deal killer, and why a lot of people, a lot of developers have not utilized the MFTE is because of the parking. So I was also working up, I'd like to, if we come back on this, I'd like to see this, but I was working up an example of this. And if you had a 100-unit building that had a 0.75 stalls per unit parking, that'd be 75 stalls. Okay, and 20 of those units are affordable housing under the MFTE. So you would have to take 20 of those 75 stalls and set them aside for the affordable units, which means that the number of stalls per unit on the market rate is less than 0.75 per unit. So I just think that that's a problem. It makes it harder to lease the market rate units because they wouldn't have access to the parking. It may not be utilized by the affordable units, and there just wouldn't, and it's not affordable to build because the cost of that parking is about $1.5 million to build that parking. So just for the 20 stalls. So for me, let's decouple it completely. From my understanding is no other city requires this as part of the affordable using MFTE. So while I don't mind Bellevue going alone on a lot of things, I don't think this is the where we should do that. So I'm in the completely decouple category. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, thank you. I've been thinking about what you just brought up in terms of, right, it is both about how many parking stalls are built and then who pays, and they are two separate discussion topics. And then I was also thinking about aligning our approach with parking to better align with the ARCH approach so that we don't end up with a whole bunch of different things. I'd like to understand a little bit more about that though. But the biggest thing I've been thinking about is the fact that I think our data shows that 90% of the people that live in Bellevue work somewhere else, and that we are trying to create more of that job and housing balance so that we are both reducing congestion from a transportation standpoint, as well as the livability and quality of life of people being able to both live and work in Bellevue, but we're not there yet. So I guess it gets to the question I've been thinking about, which is, it feels to me like there is a short-term parking need that may be more cars that folks have. And then we have this more long-term goal where hopefully we become that 15-minute city where people are able to walk to where they work, where they can buy groceries. And so I'm still thinking about exactly where I'd want us to be, but I do have a slightly different question related to parking. And that is, it seems to me if we could make sure that whatever parking is built, that space could potentially be designed to be repurposed for other uses. So if ultimately we have 20% fewer cars that are needed in a building, that maybe we're building flat plates for parking so that they could be repurposed with slightly higher ceiling heights so we can have HVAC. And I just wonder whether we are seeing that discussion when developers are coming in building, that maybe today we need X number of parking stalls, but that over time we are actually able to potentially see repurposing of those parking for other uses that may be more higher value. I'm wondering if you can help with that.
Yeah, I'm going to let staff come back to you next week with an answer to that. But I'm going to say you know too much, Councilmember Zahn.
Well, I've just seen that happen in other cities and other places.
I know, just as an engineer, you know far more than the average bear here at this conversation. But that's a good question. Okay, Deputy Mayor Nunhaus.
Thank you, Mayor. And yeah, lots of good questions and again, good conversation tonight. I guess for me, the overriding question, and staff can get back to me on this later, but and I appreciate the extensive outreach that staff has done, but again, I think the emails that we've seen and the interactions that we've had with developers over the years is that they have a hard time making this pencil out if parking is a requirement. So I'd really like to know how we make this work, because it sounds like we're close to agreement here on the 80% MFTE, but is it, if parking has to be a requirement, does that hurt our ability to create these units? So is it an absolute, can those developers create units if parking is required? Was that question outright asked, and what was the majority of their responses?
Okay, that's a good question. And again, we will get an answer for next time.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stokes.
I don't know that I have a lot to add to the prior comments, I mean, this is a hard one, I think, to figure out. So I don't have any question to ask. I'll just think about it and talk about it next time. I think it's a hard question here, and I don't know if we have all the information we need to kind of make that decision. And that'll take some more conversation. So I'll pass.
If you come up with something during the week or before we meet again on this, please feel free to send an email to staff.
Sure.
And they can include the answer in their next presentation. Councilmember Lee. And Councilmember Lee, I'm going to remind you to please keep this to 3 minutes at most.
Okay. If I'm my brothers, I would like to have, 3 parking spaces because I have 3 cars. And but at the same time, we know that, we need to encourage people not to use cars. In the future is that for people use less cars. And the technology in a lot of ways, transportation, the city policy is that we will not have to use that many cars. And, so that's what you have to deal with. And the economic reality is, it's costing money.
Uh-oh, council member, you froze. We can't hear you right this second. Am I the only one who's having this problem, or is it? Okay.
You're not the only one.
Okay. We will get back to Councilmember Lee. He's 1 minute into his discussion. So we'll give him 2 more minutes when he comes back, when he refreshes. Councilmember Barksdale.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is a tough one, as everyone has sort of mentioned, or Councilmember Stokes mentioned most recently, just given the points that have already surfaced. I guess I have a question kind of building on Deputy Mayor's question. There was some sentiment around going for the deeper affordability instead of providing money for parking. So I'd be curious about the sentiment of that among the developers in terms of prevalence. I mean, how prevalent that sentiment was. The other question I had was, is there an opportunity to explore something like they pay for transit or something like that? Or, I'm not sure how realistic that is, but it's just as many employers in the region will pay for like an Orca card for employees. Is there some alternative here? Maybe maybe it's not an either or, but maybe it's like an option, or I don't know.
That's a great question. Do you have any more questions? I just want to say, Councilmember Lee, we're going to get right back to you, okay? So just a moment. Go ahead and finish, Councilmember Barksdale.
I think that covers it.
Okay, if you come up with something else, feel free to email staff. Councilmember Lee, you have 2 more minutes. You froze on us.
I don't know what happened. Yeah, I was finishing up. Okay. I would like to see that the staff have explored other ways to help the situation. Either if the developers cannot do it because the money, let's figure out how can we help them to, make the gap smaller or bridge the gap. If the people who want to live there and they have problem coming up with $150 a month, let's figure out what else can we do. We're talking about other tools, other layering that you're talking about. So there's not just a dead end. No, it isn't. But this is my concern. Number one, I want to have more units, okay? And if we have more units, then we have to figure out how to help the people who are going to be living there. So we need to have more ideas from the staff.
Okay, thank you. All right, I guess I actually have a lot to say. So I'm going to time myself here. Okay, so I know that we've seen incidences in Redmond where you have a affordable housing development right at a transit center, and every tenant is provided an Orca pass, and they didn't need nearly as many parking stalls as required for that development. So I think that that is worth looking at. I don't like talking about parking any differently affordable housing than market rate. Either people need a parking lot or a parking space or they don't. So I think we need to be looking at this kind of more holistically. And I don't agree with the 1 stall per unit requirement per se. But isn't the state requirement that we just adopted a half stall per unit in TOD? I'm trying to remember. Does anybody recall that? Well, whatever the state requirement is, I think we should stick with that. And then we also put a provision that said if you do a parking study, you can lower that amount of parking if you prove you don't need as much. So I totally agree with that. I think we should make it possible to more easily allow no parking in 1-bedroom and studio developments in TOD, and especially in downtown. I mean, you think about all these jobs coming into town, they're not all super high paying jobs. For every high paying job, there's like 3 low paying jobs. And so if we really want to achieve that goal of having the people who work downtown, live downtown, we need to provide more opportunity for people to have a lower cost lifestyle and options for lower rents. And I think being able to live without a car is one of those. But I think what's going to really make a difference in this whole equation is having more opportunities to have affordable housing. Right now, it's so limited that people end up living in a neighborhood that doesn't really suit their needs because they can get a unit there. And I think that when we have affordable housing throughout the city, wherever there's multifamily, there's going to be a lot more choices, and people can choose a unit maybe that is larger for their family, it has more parking, or they can minimize and be somewhere where there's no parking, and that's going to work for them. But I think the key is to have choice and to have a variety in all over Bellevue. So I'm just going to underscore that I think we should look at downtown a little differently than the rest of the region. And I don't think we should look at parking requirements for affordable housing any differently than we do market rate housing. But I love Councilmember Barksdale's idea of a NORCA card if you don't have a stall. So anyway, food for thought. When will you be coming back to revisit this?
Thank you, Mayor. We're going to be back in April. We're still working with the clerk's office on the exact date. We can probably be pretty ready, but we know some of the council members are in and out on different weeks there. So we'll have that date in the next week or so.
Okay, and so I think it'd be really helpful to try to answer the questions that we've given you, and maybe provide the answers in advance if that's possible. And council members, we have lots of time to ask more questions to staff in the time before the next meeting. So I think that'll work great. So if everybody's okay with that, we will pause here and take a 6-minute break and reconvene at 9 o'clock, okay? To introduce the next study session item.
Sure, thank you, Mayor Robinson and council members. The next study session topic is about the Bellevue Botanical Garden Society, specifically the creativity and innovative kind of things they did and undertook to successfully achieve its mission during the time of this pandemic. No formal direction is being requested this evening, and joining us this evening to provide a presentation is to us about how the Garden Society pivoted during the pandemic is Nancy Cardis, the manager of the Bellevue Botanical Garden, and she's joined by Cleo Rollerson, the co-president of the Bellevue Botanical Garden Society. So Nancy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Miyake. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor Robinson and council members. Get my... My presentation is not advancing. There we go. Excuse me for a moment there. As you may know, 10 organizations partner with the city at Bellevue Botanical Garden. They all contribute in different ways, and each organization's mission aligns with the garden's mission and vision. I've always enjoyed managing this governance model, and I'm especially grateful for it now. Together, we've shared the challenge of responding to the COVID pandemic, and this has led to greater resilience for all of us. When we realized that we would be in this pandemic for the long haul, I asked staff and partner group leaders to consider how we might continue to safely serve the community. We applied state and local COVID safety guidelines to our operations, and this led to the limited return of our horticulture volunteers last summer. Thanks to their efforts, along with our frontline ground staff, the garden remains a safe and beautiful place of respite for the community. The Bellevue Botanical Gardens Society is our primary partner group. They offer programs and community events in support of our mission, and I'm pleased to introduce Society Co-President Cleo Rollerson to tell you how they accomplished their goals in these challenging times. Cleo?
Hello, I am Cleo Rollerson. I have been involved with the Bellevue Botanical Gardens Society for 7 years. I am currently co-president of the board and co-chair of Garden Delights. The Society has met the challenges of the pandemic and has proven that with innovation, creativity, and technology, we can exceed our goals and go beyond the status quo. Our staff and volunteers have become Zoom experts, and the City of Bellevue IT department has helped our staff make working from home smooth sailing. A special thanks to the IT team. Early on, we started offering our adult education program via webinars, and we have reached a larger audience than would have been possible with in-person classes. Between April 30th of 2020 and January 31st of this year, the Society offered 36 webinars and served over 3,600 people. Since Living Lab, our on-site field trip learning program for elementary school youth cannot take place at the garden right now, we are providing resources for educators and parents on our website under virtual field trips. These resources are considered extensions of our Living Lab. The Society is also reaching out to underserved populations and groups that normally cannot come to the garden. Through the schools, we connect our teacher with the students on their virtual platform. We also have teachers providing a fun science activity on Facebook Live each week. Our Trillium store shifted to an online storefront with curbside pickup. It is now open with limited hours following all COVID protocol for retail operations in King County. In 2020, we offered our annual Garden Delights event virtually. This annual community event is almost entirely powered by volunteers, and unfortunately, we could not have our volunteers install the lights for 2020 or work at the event due to COVID restrictions. Virtually, through a video of past Garden Delights images, we connected with Garden Delights attendees from earlier years. We recognized sponsors in the piece, on the Society website, and on the Garden Delights pages. The video was viewed 3,900 times on Vimeo and Facebook, and the Garden Delights page itself was viewed 32,759 times this holiday season. Yes, isn't technology fun? Our Garden Delights 2020 sponsors included Amazon, Home Street Bank, and Bernstein Porter. Our thanks to these local businesses for their support. The Society membership is growing and is a testament to the value and importance of the Bellevue Botanical Garden and the programming that the Society offers. We picked up over 435 new members over the past 10 months. New members frequently share with us how much they appreciate the Bellevue Botanical Garden not closing down during COVID, how much they enjoy the educational webinars when we are all at home, and how they are most grateful to have a peaceful respite from the daily challenges of the pandemic when they visit the garden. Garden visitation has definitely increased during the pandemic, with visitors following social distancing guidelines. Our year-end appeal in 2020 raised just over $165,000, which was largely in response to the Society not being able to hold our beloved annual event, Garden Delights. Donors came through with resounding support of all that the Society does and what the Bellevue Botanical Garden means to Bellevue residents. Looking forward, the Society will work with city staff to adapt and adjust as the pandemic plays out in the year ahead. Together, we will remain flexible and manage expectations as we work towards eventual reopening. In addition, we are moving forward with an update to the garden's interpretive plan. We are working with Nancy and the city's IT department to update the garden's plant collection software and database. Both are critical to the long-term success of the botanical garden. We have learned so much over the last year about providing high-quality virtual programming. We may incorporate some degree of virtual programming even after we are able to safely gather in person. Virtual offerings have broadened our reach and reduced barriers to inclusion for those unable to attend programs in person for reasons unrelated to the pandemic. We are moving forward with plans for safely offering garden delights and hope that the circumstances will be favorable this year. The Bellevue Botanical Garden is a true community gem, and we look forward to celebrating the 30th anniversary of the garden with you in 2022. We are most grateful for your support. I'd be happy to take any questions you have at this time.
Thank you so much. I will just say that I've always been such a fan of the garden and have watched it over the years adapt and grow. And it's just always a relevant part of Bellevue. I'm curious, I know that you are very popular with national programs and people coming from all over the country to come visit the garden and have programs in your conference facilities. How has the lack of that affected the garden, and when do you think you might be able to resume those again?
Well, we have found that the virtual webinars, classes, and lectures have worked really well. And so we get people from Maryland, Utah, Colorado, as well as Bellevue and the rest of Western Washington. So we think if anything, our national exposure has increased. But we think it's most important that we're still focusing on our local speakers, our local experts, and our local gardeners. So we really appreciate their participation as well.
Terrific. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Barksdale, followed by Councilmember Zahn and Deputy Mayor Newhouse.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to Cleo and Nancy for the presentation, and also really enjoyed the botanical gardens as well. And it was an awesome place to hang out during COVID, just a place to get out and get some inspiration from the garden. I was curious in terms of programs, do you all have sort of a visiting gardener or type of program? And then my second question is, I saw the list of partners. There's another garden not too far away from you. That's it's the Bellevue Urban Garden, and I was curious if you all ever have a chance to partner. I think it'd be a really good opportunity.
Okay, so the Bellevue Urban Garden, Nancy, is that the Master Gardener Demonstration Garden?
I think that's what we're referring to here. And it would be great to do more cross-pollination with them because we don't grow edibles and they do, and there's a high interest in edibles. So I think there are some opportunities there.
But there are a number of people that volunteer at the Bellevue Botanical Garden that are also master gardeners and are involved in the Bellevue Demonstration Garden. So even though the only formal connection is master gardeners answer questions normal times at the Bellevue Botanical Garden, there's a lot of interaction among the volunteers. Most of us wear multiple hats. In terms of the visiting gardeners, we have volunteers working at the garden, and so both contributing their skills and learning. Are you also talking about having classes where we have gardening experts come in and teach people how to garden? We have that too, both edibles and pretty things like flowers.
It's funny that you ask that question though, because I'm working with some people on the national level. We're talking about trying to have an actual visiting horticulturalist program where we visit each other's gardens and learn best practices from one another. So that was a very forward-thinking question.
Thank you. Councilmember Zahn.
Yeah, so I was just actually going to clarify the Bellevue Urban Garden is actually kitty corner from the demonstration garden, so it's not the same thing.
Thank you.
And I would really encourage you to reach out to Mabin, who is working on that urban garden, and look at that connection. And I also want to just echo what Councilmember Barstow talked about. It's just an amazing place a respite to walk around. I like going and checking out the Yao maple and see how it's growing in the Yao garden, and it's just it's thriving there. I enjoy the fact that we also have the tea ceremonies, that when we were able to have events, to be able to have that at the garden. I did have a question as we think about, I know we've had, music in the garden in the past. Have we had things like Tai Chi, which it just seems like that garden and kind of the serenity of that space would lend itself to things like Tai Chi, where, having come from Hong Kong, where a lot of the parks have, seniors that are doing Tai Chi. And it's just, I just wonder about those kinds of programs.
We have individual practitioners at the garden come and just do Tai Chi on their own. We have not had organized classes yet, but that's something we can look into. We've also had requests to look into yoga and we do wellness walks and forest bathing. And so there's more and more interest in wellness and those kinds of programs at the garden.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And then potentially programs for children to do scavenger hunts and things like that in the garden?
That we do. Mm-hmm.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Newhouse, followed by Councilmember Stokes.
Thank you, Mayor, and Nancy Cleo, thank you so much for the update. The Botanical Garden is such a jewel for the entire community year round. Although my daughter did ask if Garden Delights would be back next holiday season, like so many families. It is a mainstay as part of our holiday traditions now. In fact, she might have missed that more than Snowflake Lane. So that tells you how important it is to her and our family. So I know we don't have a crystal ball in front of us and who knows, but at this point right now, are you making plans? Because I know you plan way ahead. And to get the volunteers and the designs and everything else. So at this point, are you proceeding as if most likely you will be able to, at least to some extent? What are your thoughts?
We are looking at timed ticketing, figuring out how we can do this without any contact, still following all the rules that are in place now, assuming that we might have to deal with that. I have a team of volunteers absolutely chomping at the bit to to get involved. Because we reuse so many of the lights and different arrangements each year, we can actually still put it on if we get a yes, you can go as early as late as October 1. So yes, we're planning, yes, we're thinking, yes, we're strategizing, and we sure hope we can do it in some way.
Oh, fantastic. That's great to hear. And again, thanks for the update. And I'll just tell my daughter from now to keep her fingers crossed.
and if we can do it, there might be a lost penguin wandering around this year.
Oh, wow.
One of our longest standing volunteers has been surviving the COVID restrictions, building a blue penguin that's looking lost.
Oh, I love it.
And I would like to, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, Nancy, thank you for sharing some of those great testimonials in your presentation as well. Those are fantastic, and it shows what an incredible community treasure this really is. But sorry, Nancy, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead, please.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge Cleo for something that she hasn't mentioned yet. So in addition to being co-president of the whole society, she has been co-chair of Garden Delights for how many years now, Cleo?
Oh.
But that's fun. I mean, it's a great team of volunteers that are really committed to Garden Delights and to the garden.
Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Stokes.
Hi, Nancy and Cleo. Good to see both of you virtually. Yeah, I want to add to what everybody's been saying about it. And one thing on the Bellevue Urban Garden, and I'll get in touch with you and we'll can talk about that, because it's on some city land on, just across from there on that area, and it's an educational thing, and I think there'd be some good ties in, and they get a lot of elementary school kids coming there, and people go out and they have, I even planted an apple tree out there and some things like that. So it's
great.
The whole thing of the gardening is with that is really neat, and I think we could have some synergies there. The other thing is that, again, is to thank you for being open. The cafes really worked out well. I think and the food is really good and the drinks, so that's nice. But it's just nice to have that respite and be able to go out, there. And people have been really good about wearing their masks and being, following all the COVID requirements and everything. So it's just, I think it's helped us have some normalcy, and it's been really good. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that I'm on the East Rail Corridor Advisory Committee and working on that, and of course that's coming closer there. And one of the things I always mention, and other people do too, is in the connectivity that trail will have. And one of the places I keep saying, we go down that trail and you could just go up a few blocks and you're up in the Bellevue Botanical Garden, and you have to see that. And people like that, and it's a really great connection.
Yeah.
Again, I think just having the Botanical Garden is just fantastic, and really appreciate all the work that you're doing on it and keeping it going, and looking forward to the Gardens of Delights out there. I bet we can do it.
We hope so, and we're looking forward to having that connection. We think it will bring more visitors to the garden and give people more ways to get from the garden to downtown and vice versa. So we're real excited.
Yeah, it is great. So thank you very much. Good seeing you.
Great. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, Bellevue Botanical Garden has been such a gem in the middle of a big city, and so it's a treasure. You have had always, very many international visitors. People who come here, and they appreciate all the, emphasis on the plants, trees, vegetations, and of course the Yao Garden and the tea house. So have you noticed continuing people from the from outside the country come to see the garden during the COVID-19? Because I know that all the tourism, everything's being affected drastically. But I'm just curious about, how did that affect the international visitors? That's the first question. Second question is, the Wilburton Elementary School is now close by. And of course, whether that has any impact to the programming of the Bellevue Botanical Garden with the school.
I'll take the first question and you can take the second one, Cleo. How's that?
Okay.
Okay, so regarding the international, one of the things that we lost during COVID was the ability to have, pens and our visitor sign-in book. That's where we got the information about where people were coming from. So we can't measure that now. Prior to COVID, though, I think we were up to something like 52 countries were represented by our visitors. We'll put that back out as soon as it's safe to do so.
And we really find it a plus to have the Wilburton School so close by. We watch parents walk their children to and from school now that they're back at least a little bit. And we think long term that there will be more and more opportunities for interactions between the school and the garden, especially with Living Lab and some other programs. But I think that will be a great long-term partnership. Nancy, any other thoughts on Wilburton?
No, I think you summed it up well.
Thank you, Cleo, and for all the volunteers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for being patient tonight also. Okay, Mr. Miyake, what is next?
Yeah, so Mayor and council members, the last item on your study session agenda is an update on the Northeast King County Regional Communications Agency also known to many of you as NORCOM. Just by way of background, NORCOM was formed back in 2009 as a nonprofit corporation that serves 14 fire and medical agencies, as well as 6 police agencies, I believe. An overall goal was to ensure interoperability between the various regional agencies. So we have an update for you tonight, which will focus on governance, governance structure, some of the accomplishments, and some of the future initiatives the agency will take on. No formal council direction is being requested this evening. This is really informational and opportunity to ask questions. So joining us this evening is the Bill Hamilton, the Executive Director of NORCOM. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bill. Bill?
Thank you, City Manager Miyake. That's a hard act to follow. I'm not nearly as beautiful as those gardens are. Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Neuenhuis, and members of council, thank you for the privilege of being here tonight. As stated, my name is Bill Hamilton. I'm the new director here at NORCOM. Prior to NORCOM, I spent 32 years in public safety, 4 years in New Jersey, and 28 years with the Kirkland Police Department. 20 of those years were in management. I retired from law enforcement in June of 2018 and joined NORCOM as the police liaison. And through a series of events, I was appointed to the director's position in May of 2019. I will say quite candidly, it remains a privilege and an honor to serve our agencies, communities, and the outstanding NORCOM team. So as stated earlier, there's no action required of council. And tonight I'd just like to briefly touch upon the origin of NORCOM, our business model, the NORCOM communications team, and quickly touch on a topic as we look to the future. As council is well aware, highly functional partnerships and regional service models provide for many efficiencies, such as economies of scale, single points of service delivery, and the proper stewardship of the public's money. While this is also true for NORCOM, at its very core, NORCOM was formed to save lives. And if you will indulge me a quick story in support of this. Prior to NORCOM's existence, the Kirkland Fire Department was dispatched by Eastside Communications, and the Kirkland Police Department was dispatched by the Kirkland Police Department Dispatch Center. As a much younger police officer in early 2002, 2003, I responded with the fire department on a report of a swimmer in distress on Lake Washington. Both 911 centers were receiving 911 calls related to the swimmer's location. I was standing alongside a Kirkland firefighter, working together to better define the swimmer's location. Our efforts were significantly hampered because different witnesses had called into 2 different 911 centers. And as such, we were receiving conflicting and delayed information from both centers. This bifurcation of police and fire 911 services was inefficient and did not provide for rapid coordination and deployment of information and the proper resources. While I am not suggesting that the eventual drowning could have been prevented, I will say with certainty that in contrast, the NORCOM partnership and its model provides for highly effective police and fire interoperability, where the opportunity for success is maximized. Through a great deal of hard work, perseverance, and strong visionary leadership, an ILA, interlocal agreement, I apologize, An interlocal agreement was implemented in 2007. NORCOM began delivering services on July 1st, 2009, and we're now approaching our 12-year anniversary. NORCOM is one of the largest 911 centers in King County and one of 3 which provides for both police and fire services. NORCOM is governed by an interlocal agreement and managed by our governing board, comprised of 1 representative from each user agency or municipality. Deputy City Manager McCommon is your representative on the governing board. And I will say he is an excellent partner, and I believe he's an amazing ambassador for the city of Bellevue. As far as funding NORCOM, the vast majority of the NORCOM budget, 86%, is funded by participating user agencies. This is followed by E911 excise tax revenue at about 11%. And lastly, 3% of our revenue is miscellaneous, from grants or agency-funded specialty projects. Of the 17 various user agencies or municipalities, the city of Bellevue is busiest due to population. In 2020, approximately 43% of all NORCOM police and fire-related calls were within the city of Bellevue limits. I just want to touch on this partnership model a little bit more. The partnership model of NORCOM has proven itself to be a well-regarded business model, and we often receive inquiries from other states looking to mirror this business model. But at the community level, NORCOM is a people business, and by necessity, we are invited into people's very private lives, often when they're having their very worst day. This public trust is sacred, and we treat it as such. The NORCOM staff values this partnership with our communities and our agencies. And these particular pictures, the center picture and the one to the right, are some of our dispatchers who were invited by the fire department and the Bellevue Police Department to one of your community events. And they were very, very excited to have participated. And it provided a mechanism for us to build stronger relationships in the field with the community that we're serving. As stated earlier, NORCOM currently serves 6 police agencies and 14 fire agencies. As you can see, the fire service area is quite large and extends from Shoreline Bothell area to Skykomish and Snoqualmie Pass. The NORCOM service area is also very diverse. We serve almost 700,000 people across 620 square miles. The diversity of the service area is somewhat unique and requires specialized knowledge and training for our team. For instance, in a single day, a NORCOM 911 dispatcher or call taker might need to transition from providing CPR instructions for a child in a downtown building to an overturned boater on a river or lake, or assist fire and search and rescue in locating a hiker lost deep in the woods near Skykomish or Snoqualmie Pass. I will say it's my both professional and personal opinion that we have an outstanding communications team. At the time of this slide, our team consisted of 54 dedicated employees. They were dedicated to both answering 911 calls or dispatching resources. We now have additional people, new hired employees in our academy, and we're up to full staff. What's unique about NORCOM is that all of our employees are cross-trained as 911 call takers and dispatchers. Our infrastructure allows anybody in the center to answer a 911 call from any workstation during peak periods of activity. The cross-training of our dispatchers allows us much more flexibility, particularly when we need more resources in a certain area during a crisis, such as a structure fire or significant police emergency. There are many call centers, 911 call centers in Washington and other states in which your employee is either a call taker or a dispatcher. Our ability to cross-train our staff as both call takers and dispatchers offers us a great amount of flexibility in the deployment of our resources. Just want to touch briefly on our recruitment, development, and retention of our excellent people. NORCOM is comprised of intelligent, dedicated, and empathetic people. Due to the importance of the 911 call taker and dispatcher role, our hiring process and subsequent training program is quite robust and ever evolving. Applicants are carefully screened and undergo an in-depth background process similar to that of a fire or police applicant. Upon hire, they progress through a lengthy series of skills development, beginning with classroom curriculum and then proceeding to 911 call taking, police dispatching, and finally fire dispatching. On average, it takes 1.5 years before an employee is fully trained. I also want to note that we are currently in the process of retooling our recruitment process in an attempt to attract a broader candidate pool across our entire community. My hope is to attract the widest pool of candidates possible to better reflect the communities which we're serving. Once an employee is fully released on their own, the education doesn't stop there. The education continues throughout their career. It is critical to our success to hire intelligent, compassionate people, train them well, and retain them by remaining highly competitive with our peer agencies in the market and continuing to challenge them as well as support them towards their professional growth as they progress throughout their career. Like any profession, the 911 industry is ever adapting. We need to meet current challenges, evolving challenges to include customer needs, and then the quick changes that are occurring in technologies and societal expectations. We strive to remain nimble and responsive to such change. Excuse me. Like previous presenters, I just want to touch briefly on our response to the COVID challenge. The COVID crisis remains a very large challenge for all of us. While most of our technology and administrative staff are working from home, similar to our police, fire, and EMS partners, the 911 communications team simply cannot work from home. They too have had to overcome many external challenges in order to continue coming into work to serve our communities. They responded admirably, and our communities and first responders remain in very good hands. In response to COVID, like many agencies in many cities, NORCOM quickly adapted to provide a safer work environment for our employees. While the response measures were numerous, one of the most effective tools we deployed was the formation of what we called our COVID task force. This task force was comprised of a subject matter expert from each of our NORCOM disciplines, and their focus was on safety, operational continuity, and internal communications. Additionally, we continued to work ever closely with our fire, police, and EMS customers. We established alerts within our CAD system for first responders, so they knew in advance if they were responding to a known location with a COVID positive patient. We created emergency work schedules and evacuation plans, and we practiced them. And then we also developed anticipatable messages from the public as our calls escalated from people who were simply afraid. So we wanted to make sure we had a cohesive, calming message for the public. As we look to the future, to meet the needs of our communities and agencies, many operational and technical projects are developed every year. The current project underway is in regard to the unification, the possible unification of our two CAD systems, which is computer-aided dispatch. For many years, NORCOM has maintained two separate standalone CAD systems from two different vendors. One was for fire and one was for police. I will note there are very legitimate and complex reasons why NORCOM once chose to use two CAD systems. But technology has evolved significantly. And if feasible, a single CAD system would increase staff productivity, save public money, and reduce some of the redundancy we have in maintaining equipment for two separate systems. However, such a decision requires significant research, subject matter expert input, and strong stakeholder input. In this case, that being our fire customers as well as our police customers. In an effort to explore this and perhaps reduce or mitigate future user agency costs, NORCOM is working closely with our partner agencies, our chiefs, and our governing board members to explore the fiscal and operational feasibility of migrating to one of the two existing CAD systems. Our underlying goal and measurement in this will be that we would need to be able to do this without impacting the quality of service delivery our communities currently enjoy. This is a large, complex undertaking, but I will say the partnership is working very well. It remains highly professional, collaborative, and inclusive. On behalf of the entire NORCOM team, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to provide this overview. I would also like to thank the entire City of Bellevue team for their continued support, excellent partnership, and for the opportunity to provide essential services from Bellevue City Hall. I'm not sure everyone truly understands the safety and resiliency that this building provides. It has allowed NORCOM to effectively function even during the most challenging of times. With that, I will turn the meeting back to Mayor Robinson.
I think you're muted, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation, and I especially appreciate the compliments on our staff and Deputy City Manager Nathan McCommon. Really appreciate that. I'm looking at everybody. I see Councilmember Barksdale, I see Councilmember Zahn and Councilmember Lee. So let's start with Councilmember Barksdale.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Bill, for the presentation, and thanks to the call takers and dispatchers for the work that they're doing, especially during COVID. Kind of building on an earlier conversation about the mental health or crisis assistance team. What's happening in NORCOM in terms of maybe having a mental health professional as part of the NORCOM staff to help with? So there's obviously a need for mental health professionals in the field, but also some of the calls that you get maybe to benefit from a mental health professional. And I'll ask my second question and then open it up. Given that the dispatchers and call takers had to work through COVID and are indoors, and I know you're taking this, the safety precautions, what's the status in terms of vaccinations for call takers and dispatchers, especially given that they're considered emergency workers?
Thank you. I'll start with the first part of the question. We are watching the conversation regarding behavioral health and mental health efforts very closely. I'm aware that there's many types of legislation that's currently before our representatives. We are engaged with several of our departments are also pursuing either a navigator grant, which is usually on the police side. We are also engaged with the Bellevue Police Department as they work on their crisis intervention team model. We currently do not have a mental health professional on staff 24/7. Not for the purposes of assisting with calls for service. I do believe that there will be an opportunity in the near future to have this conversation in a more robust manner. I believe that some of the societal issues are going to drive us there very quickly. And we're watching that very closely, and we're staying engaged. I recently was asked to do a deal of research and outreach to the CAHOOTS team in Eugene, Oregon. And I spoke both to the police chief there, as well as some of the members of the CAHOOTS team themselves. And it's an effective model for that area. Right now, many of the cities, many of the programs are funded through an EMS levy, and that program is designed around what they call a referral model. So it's an after action, after contact triaging, getting people help and housing and things along those lines. The only model that I'm aware of in our area now is doing more of a response model or getting very close to response model is the Bellevue Fire Cares program. When they check into service, they notify NORCOM that they're in service and available. And when a police or firefighter responds to a call for service, if they're not the right tool, and Bellevue Fire Cares, is available, they'll request that resource, and that's been very effective. And they've been a pleasure to work with. Regarding the second part of your question, I must admit, I don't remember what the second part of your question is. So can you please restate that?
Yeah, sure. So just noting that acknowledging that the call takers and dispatchers are working through COVID and, as you mentioned in your presentation, have to show up and they're in that internal environment or enclosed environment. What's the status on vaccinations for call takers and dispatchers and other staff that are working?
I'm very glad you asked that question. I apologize for not writing it down. The status is actually very good. We've been working closely with the Zone 1 fire chiefs, which includes Chief Hagan, and through a regional partnership with the Snoqualmie Indian tribe, they provided vaccines for all of our employees as of this Saturday. The county system for first responders broke it down to an A, B, and C category as far as when dispatchers become eligible. And right now the eligibility was only for dispatchers 50 years or older, and I believe that's only 1 or 2 of our staff. So if not for our fire chiefs and their partnerships outside of our region, we wouldn't have been able to get our staff vaccines at this juncture. So I'm happy to report probably 75% of our staff has now been vaccinated or offered back, and everyone has been offered vaccines.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So Councilmember Zahn, followed by Councilmember Lee and Councilmember Stokes. Go ahead.
Yes. So thank you, Bill. You know, it's such a stressful time for NORCOM even before COVID, right? You have such an important role in our community, saving lives, as you were talking about. And, you know, I was thinking about, you know, just how stressful it can be for both the call takers and the dispatchers, because our police and fire rely on the information that NORCOM provides them as in terms of situational awareness before they're going out on a call. And then what you mentioned about, you know, 66,000 calls to our police and then 16,000 to fire, you know, that's amazing in terms of just the volume of calls from our community for care. I agree with Councilmember Barksdale that to the degree we can look at providing some mental health resources to support NORCOM, and hopefully we can do that in a proactive basis instead of trying to figure out how to get money after the fact, because I think that that is such an important piece. I really appreciate the fact that from looking at the training, that they have both academy training, one-on-one training, de-escalation, implicit bias. I think that's so important. What I do wonder about is in that training, are they, and so I'll kind of put out my questions and then have you answer. Are they scenario-based training so that it really gives them that interactive opportunity to really look at how you would respond depending on what the scenario is and the nuances? And then how do they deal with multiple languages and culturally appropriate interaction? Because different communities may describe things differently. So how do you account for some of those differences? And then in determining what level of crisis it is and who gets the response? Because I think that we've been talking a lot in our community about what calls fire may be responding to versus police versus perhaps wellness checks being done by perhaps another entity. So I'm wondering if you could comment about that. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I may have misunderstood the previous question regarding a mental health professional at NORCOM. I thought that was to assist with the screening of 911 calls.
It was.
It was? Okay. We have a peer support program, and we have a mental health professional on staff to assist our employees as they go through traumatic calls for service and things along those lines. As far as dealing with different cultures, helping and assisting different cultures and language barriers, we have contracts with outside agencies. If we have a caller that we don't truly understand their need or we believe there's a language barrier, we actually have the ability to get an interpreter on the phone. These are all certified interpreters. The second portion of your problem regarding just being more aware of different cultures and communications and things along those lines, I believe that's an area that we certainly could do better in, and that some of the conversation occurring now in our communities has brought that to light. So that's something we're actually looking further into and wish to pursue in a more robust manner.
Yeah, and so perhaps that scenario training might be one way to get at that. I was just trying to understand, you know, when you look at the training that's being provided to the dispatcher and call takers, how do you account for these nuances and the scenarios? I mean, are they getting the kind of that type of training? Because sometimes it may not always be that, you know, training is 1 + 1 is 2. It may be that 1 + 1 plus some nuance might get you to 3 instead of 2.
Yeah, I understand that, and I don't believe I have enough of an informed answer to speak to that, but I will certainly get you an answer and to provide it to you through the city manager's office. We do training starts out with a straight curriculum, and then there is it's more of immersion in which they listen to real 911 calls, and they work through that scenario as a training class, and then they move from that curriculum to actually just spending several weeks just listening to other 911 calls to see how an experienced dispatcher handle those calls. But specific to your question, some of those nuances that may be cultural, I don't have that answer for you, but I will get you one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Hi, Bill. How are you?
Fine. Thank you, sir.
Good, good. I want to congratulate you. Very lucky to join such a wonderful organization, NORCOM. NORCOM is another good model example of what Bellevue has provided as a leadership for regional projects, you know, such as, you know, Cascade Water Alliance, you know, government projects such as ARCH, you know, I mean, these are all the bodies, institutions, the city of Bellevue instituted because there's a regional need and a regional body. And you mentioned how important it is to have regional collaboration on these issues. So it's indeed one of the very proud, you know, accomplishments Bellevue come up with. And I also thank you for coming up and talk to us. You know, I think this is very good to know that you have been thinking about some of the very creative, innovative things. One of which is the technology you're talking about, you know, like this CAD system. Makes sense, unified system. You know, number one, it's for safety. You have one system. Two, you know, it's fiscally responsible, right? I mean, I think that's very Absolutely. Good. Yeah, and your training, how you pick the people that work with you, and I think that's excellent because nothing replaces the importance of personnel, you know, that are dedicated to what they do and being responsible. I think, and you mentioned about you're more sensitive now to hiring, you know, diversity and all that. You're more responsive, thinking about diversity and answering, you know, what Councilmember Janice was talking about. So I think this is very good. So I really appreciate you, you know, adapting maybe some of the more you know, important, relevant social issues that we have. Finally, I want to also say that you mentioned about how, you know, as a whole, you know, how you can work with all the local jurisdictions, and maybe there's more ideas and thinking that you know, I know that you're thinking about it. I think we just mentioned to you, I think knowing Bellevue, the city manager, we're very open. And I think this collaboration, communication, cross-departmental city is very important. So keep up the good work. We look forward to hearing more from you, coming to tell us what great and more things that you are going to do, you know, for the region. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember
Stokes.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to thank you and appreciate the comments you made before. It just reminded me when I was mayor, I went to these meetings and it was very interesting. I mean, I really appreciate the work that's done, and it was good to get to know personally, you know, a lot of the people that were involved in NORCOM and all. And that's, yeah, it's an amazing organization. It's one of those that we don't know much about. People in the community don't know it until they need you. You know, you're there. But thanks very much, and really appreciate that. And glad you're working with Nathan. Yeah, he's a jewel. So anything we can do to help, let us know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. And I think that wraps up our questions here. And we are at the end of our meeting and we are 7 minutes early. So I will adjourn and thank everybody very much for the excellent conversation. I look forward to getting together again next week. Meeting adjourned. Good night.